Yo, Atlas speaking, and welcome to part 3 of What If I Was Reborn into the Avatar Last Airbender world as the legendary Antithesis Avatar. Let the tale begin. Chapter 41, Leaping Upwards. I assist myself with a jet of fire. I directed at one of the earthbenders were facing and stopped maintaining the fire in a dense stream, losing the sense of thrust immediately. However, the fire bursts out in a raging firestorm, engulfing the earthbender. I sense he's still alive and not particularly discomfort. Landing on the ground, I release a bit of earthbending through my legs, feeling the vibrations this way. I could have gone without using any bending at all and simply relied on tactile contact with the ground, but in battle, that seems impractical to me, and besides, I much prefer wearing shoes to the prospect of walking barefoot. The opponent I covered with the firestorm protected himself with a stone wall. To my left is another earthbender, and behind me approaches a wave of earth transformed by their bending. The changes in the earth's vibrations make this easy to sense. I leap to the left and close in on the opponent, who sends a square boulder at me. I duck and sweep, creating a flame blade on my leg that cuts off the opponent's legs, and then I have to straighten up and leap back a few meters with jet propulsion, dodging attacks from two deadly agents. In flight, I start to accumulate an electric charge. I land and extend my hands with my index and middle fingers together. A lightning bolt tears away, but misses my opponents and continues on, only to find an obstacle in the backs of two other earthbender masters, who, a moment later, are swept away by a wave of bright blue fire that they couldn't defend against due to my lightning. I dodge a boulder that flies close, threatening to take off half my head. And another, and another. Finally, seizing the moment, I send a volley of explosive fireballs at the earthbenders. Numerous explosions follow, and I sense the death of one of the earthbenders, then I see a flash of blue fire and feel the life force of the second earthbender cut short. Focusing, I sense Azula standing next to me, ready to launch into another attack, as well as 13 more earthbenders that have surrounded us. Azula, stay put, don't leave my side. I shouted to her, so she could hear me even through the roar of flames burning around us. Without waiting for Azula's response, I begin to release huge streams of fire from my hands in all directions, which immediately start to swirl, forming a fire tornado, and continuously feeding this fiery calamity with oxygen, making it look truly terrifying. Azula and I are at the center of this firestorm, which completely covers the earthbenders, as well as tens of square meters of ground around us. It takes a tremendous amount of energy to create this newly improvised technique on the fly. Through the earth, I can feel the ATLA have each surrounded themselves with 1.5 meter walls, completely protecting themselves from the fire, but the fire starts to turn blue, and I feel that controlling the element has become easier. Turning around, I see that Azula has also joined in the technique and has taken part of the control, sharing it between us, and infusing her own strength, making the fire much hotter. And since I no longer have to spend all my strength controlling the fire, I can afford to be a little tricky. A small concentration and a willful effort create hundreds of tiny defects in the ATLA's defense, and the stone walls, which had withstood the monstrous temperature and pressure of this firestorm, were instantly destroyed, and the earthbenders were quickly deprived of their lives as their bodies were almost instantly incinerated. The temperature of the fire in this storm must now be approaching 2,000 degrees, while a human body burns, if memory serves, already at 1,200, though it takes almost an hour for that. The flames subsided, and Azula and I stood amidst scorched and molten earth, on a small island. I was breathing heavily, actively producing oxygen in my lungs, drenched in sweat, and close to exhaustion, spending the last drops of energy on recovering my breath. Azula was in a better condition than me, not having spent all her energy on this technique, but also slightly dropped her shoulders and breathed more heavily. They were stronger than previous opponents, I said, taking several breaths after each word. Agreed. But we managed. Now it's unlikely anyone will interfere, and by the end of the week, the army will already be in the city, Azula said, feeling much better. Yes, there were many earthbending masters here. They wielded their element on a completely different level than all the previous earthbenders I had encountered. Maybe Bumi could do better, but our fight with him was very brief, and I simply didn't give him a chance to do much. But the power he showed when he dropped a multi-ton stone statue on me. Here, their power was clearly less than Bumi's, but they demonstrated many more tricks and acted in concert. They didn't just throw stones, they hid and struck from under the ground, pressed with columns and cliffs, tried to impale us on stone spikes, moved across the terrain at high speed on their strange footwear, as I felt, made of earth, and their earth gloves were a dangerous weapon. They manipulated earth much more skillfully, diversely, and expertly than the earthbenders I had seen before, though it was noticeable that they were overly confident. 47 mages of such caliber were a very big challenge, and if Azula hadn't come with me, I wouldn't have managed, not using all the elements and bending, but only lightning and fire. "How are you holding up?" Azula asked, turning to me. Still holding on, just almost out of strength," I replied, meaning magical strength, at least, so I need to rest. "Let's go. I'll help you get to the drill, and you can rest in the medical section there." "Yes, that would be simply wonderful. And be careful, I think I have a crack in my right hand." "All right." Azula took my left hand and slung it over her shoulders, then helped me walk, which was really hard for me, as I was incredibly tired. I hadn't fully recovered from the last time, after holding back the wall, in terms of rest, not just magical reserves. We headed back to the drill, and I felt the remnants of life force I had stolen from the mages on the wall being used to bring my body to an acceptable state. Soon, I felt the crack in my hand almost healed, and within 15 minutes, there was no trace of it left. The remnants went towards overall physical recovery. Fatigue slowly faded, bruises healed. After all, with such a number of opponents, especially professionals, I was hit several times. That's how I got the crack in my hand, and bruises were just a tree in comparison. We slowly walked towards the drill, which was also coming to meet us. Soon, Fire Nation soldiers came out to meet us, who picked me up and helped me go to the medical section for examination, while Azula went to the control cabin. I was greeted by a young man who turned out to be the doctor on this machine. He led me to his section. In the medical part, they quickly examined me, said that overall I was healthy and just overworked, so I should rest. They gave me something to eat and told me to go to sleep. Lying in bed, of which there were about a dozen here, though I was the only one lying in them, I looked at the ceiling and wanted to fall asleep, but sleep didn't come, so I wanted to talk, and the doctor became my target. "Hey, what's your name?" I asked, not getting up from bed and not moving. "Pai Sho, Sir Garo," he answered me. "Oh, you already know my name." "Of course, Sir Garo. Everyone here knows you, though not just here. Lately, you've been talked about a lot among the soldiers and benders. Especially among the latter. Why is that all of a sudden?" I asked, finally turning to my interlocutor, who was now brewing himself some tea. "Well, they say you're one of the two geniuses of your generation. Like Princess Azula. She's long been considered a genius of firebending, but you managed to surpass her in combat. However, you gained your fame for something else. They say you mastered the lightning technique in the shortest time and can use it without any preparation. Rumors spread. Everyone also knows that you managed to stand alone against the Avatar in the city of Omashu. All this gave you the nickname Genius of Lightning," he said with a smirk. "Yes, indeed, sounds very funny, especially from my side, heh. Sorry, Sir Garo, I'm not laughing because of your nickname. Just, you see, somehow it turned out that I'm acquainted, with someone briefly, with three of the most famous geniuses of the world, each of approximately the same generation. Now I'm acquainted with you, briefly met Princess Azula when she came here for her friend Miss Ty Lee. That's when I had a few words with the princess. Really, not everyone is so lucky in life." "And the third one? Who is it?" I asked, remembering who else is known in the world besides me and Azula. "Oh, Sir Garo, you won't believe it." Pai Sho quietly began to drink his hot tea from the mug, looking at me with eyes that held both fear and admiration. "I am acquainted, and dare I hope, very well acquainted with none other than Joe, known also as Chimamanda Monster," he said proudly. "And most importantly, I am one of the few from the Fire Nation who survived after meeting him and, as far as I know, the only one he spared." "Is that so?" I said, recalling similar cases and all my encounters with people from the Fire Nation when I might have left someone alive and, moreover, spared someone. "I just don't remember any such battle." "And what did you do that he spared you?" You see, I'm not exactly proud to tell this. All my comrades that day were killed by him, and a few days later they took me from there, wanted to send me to another facility, but I used those few connections and left for military medical school. I studied there almost the full term, but dropped out because I wanted to join the soldiers, where I finished my training. They still let me do it, and, after a short practice, I came here. "And yet, what did you do?" I asked, searching my memory for all the facilities I had visited in my life where I had wiped out the entire staff. Only one picture flashed in my mind, but I didn't leave anyone alive there, or I gave Chimamanda Monster a cup of water, he said quietly. "The first one," I whispered involuntarily, overwhelmed by memories. However, this stream of memories was interrupted by the sound of a broken cup with tea spilled on the floor. I looked at the doctor and saw his pale face, wide-open eyes, and chest rising much more frequently than usual from rapid breathing. "WH, what did you say, Sir Garo?" he asked, as if afraid of his own question and even more terrified of the possible answer. "Me?" I asked loudly. "Nothing, Paisho, nothing. You know, you really were lucky to meet him and to survive after that. It seems that cup of water meant a lot to him." "All right, I'll try to sleep after all." "Why yes, sweet dreams, Sir Garo." With those words, Paisho left the compartment and, as I felt, just slid down the metal wall, now sitting on the floor. What a meeting, I said to myself and closed my eyes. Chapter 42, the second wall, smaller than the outer one, still commanded a monumental presence that warranted its depiction on all world maps. Breaching it proved much more challenging for us, with sabotage squads consisting of the ATLA, a large number of regular earthbenders, as well as ordinary soldiers and even some mercenaries or partisans who had decided to oppose us on a volunteer basis. The constant emergence of enemy units at different points, the continuous battles with only short breaks to reach another enemy squad, this was as draining as the uninterrupted use of bending. And when both are combined, especially without having fully recovered. Our rapid response group, consisting of me, Azula, Ty Lee, and Mai, had destroyed the 16th squad. Immediately after, we rushed to another location, informed by a signalman with flags from the drill's cabin about their whereabouts. In addition to us, firebenders and soldiers, tanks were firing from a distance. In short, everyone was doing what they could. Some squads were annihilated without our help, sometimes we just helped niche off the enemy, and sometimes we barely managed to arrive in time to save a squad of firebenders and soldiers from ATLA units. Constant running and fighting on the edge of our physical capabilities, even with the technique of oxygenating our bodies. Still, it was somewhat easier for me than for the others. Mai was particularly struggling. As an expert in throwing weapons, she surpasses all of us in this skill or even art, but her supplies of throwing weapons, no matter how large, were quite limited, and now, like in the last 5 fights, she was going without them or using improvised means. Ty Lee had it slightly easier than her. Her physical condition and endurance were on par or even slightly above Azula's, though if so, not by much. But she was also very tired. Azula and I were in a much better physical condition. Bending allows for a significant strengthening of the body, which happens with constant physical training and helps to use energy much more slowly. So, all else being equal, a bender will always remain standing where a non-bender would fall from exhaustion. However, we also felt a significant fatigue from using bending. And Azula was even worse off than me, despite recent events and my not being fully recovered, because my reserve of this very chi was more than 4 times larger than hers. Yet, I felt we were both nearing overexertion. A rumble sounded, and we saw the drill starting to bite into the wall and, actually, drilling it. This was accompanied by a loud noise, spreading throughout the area, making earthbenders wince, who understood that we were successfully preventing them from doing anything, and making us, the invaders, smile, at least internally, from understanding that we were very close to our goal. How long until the army arrives? I shouted to Azula, standing next to me and trying to rest a bit while waiting for information on a new squad. Ty Lee and I did the same. And I did the same, also directly controlling most processes in my body, accelerating all these recovery processes multiple times. By evening, it will have breached the outer wall. In 3 hours, they will be at this wall and pass through the passage we created. We're almost there, Garo, and we can finally rest properly. Azula shouted back, smiling. Hooray! Ty Lee shouted, overcoming her fatigue. Finally, some rest. Mai said nothing. She sat on one of the many rocks, resting. Our clothes had been thoroughly worn out over the day, like the previous day, and Mai's were in tatters, not the beautiful dress she started yesterday in. Why aren't they informing us of new squads? I asked aloud to myself, but Azula answered, looking towards the drill's cabin like me. Maybe new ones aren't appearing yet. They probably decided to organize a defense on the other side of the wall with all their forces, realizing that stopping the drill before it reaches the wall is futile. So, we will be met with organized defense and a large number of opponents on the other side, among whom may be all those we have encountered before, soldiers, earthbenders, Daili, mercenaries. Even with all the forces we have, this might not be enough to destroy these forces, considering our condition. Do you think we should wait for the army to arrive? Azula asked, pondering my words. If we wait until evening, those who gather there will attack us first, and then they will have an even greater advantage. No, we cannot wait. We need to attack swiftly and not give the enemy time to coordinate actions with all their forces. This has allowed us to successfully move forward so far, otherwise, all those squads that we destroyed one after another would have been much larger or even merged into one squad, and I doubt we could handle it. At least without me using the other elements and bloodbending in particular, to physically recover, not get tired, and maintain a constant body tone, as well as airbending, as in this element I possess my most powerful area of effect destruction and annihilation techniques, repeatedly tested during my journey as Chimamanda Monster. In firebending, I had not yet focused on developing a mass destruction factor, although many of my attacks already have such a nature. We need to come up with something, we don't have much time. Azula shouted to me. I thought about what I could do. In theory, I could sneak to the other side through the wall using bloodbending, its most unnoticeable application, and destroy any ambush there, and even fully recover physically, just not to overdo it with the stolen life. No more than 2 or 3 benders, or else the old influence might affect my body. However, breaching the wall would make our actions too conspicuous. The nature of the corpses would be quite unusual. Burning them was an option, but too complex. It was simpler to find another way. After some thought, I came up with a plan. Azula, I've figured out how to eliminate the defenders behind the second wall. What do we need to do? She asked immediately, not letting me say another word. Nothing much, just a metal cable long enough that one end can be dropped from the wall while holding the other end at the top. Azula nodded and began signaling something to the drill's cabin using gestures. I hadn't learned this system of signs, so I had no idea what she was saying. We received the cable quite quickly. The wall hadn't even been half drilled through by that point. Of course, such a long cable wasn't found on the drill, but many shorter ones were quickly fused together and given to us. The second wall of Ba Sing Se wasn't as monumental and impregnable as the first, outer wall. It was monumental, marked on all world maps for its significance, but it stood only 40 VE meters tall compared to the 100 meters of the outer wall, and was 15 meters wide compared to 30 at the first. Yes, for my original world, Earth, these were colossal structures, and for this world as well. We received a 70-meter metal cable about half a centimeter thick. The problem of delivering it to the top arose, but there was no real issue there. I would clear this section of the wall. Thankfully, according to the information provided by the cabin to Azula, there was almost no one on the wall. Afterward, Azula would attach the cable to herself and wire to the wall. However, carrying the cable was heavy, requiring a lot of effort to ascend with it, so she wouldn't participate in clearing the wall. The strength would be needed for something else. The clearing was quick, taking less than VE minutes. In my sector, there were only VE earthbenders and 13 soldiers, who, it seemed to me, could hardly oppose strong benders, with rare exceptions. After my signal, Azula EW to the wall on a jet of fire, landing and breathing heavily. Flying like that on your own is one thing. I could almost do it myself if I had a bit more control over the element, but carrying a heavy load while doing it is another matter entirely. But Azula quickly recovered while I took the cable from her. I tied one end around the legs of one of the corpses with difficulty, and held the other end in my hand. Azula, now listen carefully and remember everything I'm about to tell you. In some way, the success of this entire military campaign and my life in particular depends on it. I turned to Azula, getting close to her face, and started telling her a half-truth. Now, I'll jump down with one end of the cable to where the enemies are. I already know their location and will release my end. As soon as the cable touches the ground, you need to start accumulating as large a lightning charge as you can, and when you're ready, signal me, shout anything, it doesn't matter what. Then, release the lightning into the cable and hold it as long as you can. Got it, Azula? Yes, she nodded, and I, without distracting her further or waiting for anything else, since time was short, jumped off the wall and used fire to direct myself straight to the group of earthbenders underground. They might have been planning a surprise attack from below, and they would have had a chance, if I hadn't sensed them. I landed and released the metal cable, which immediately fell to the ground. I jumped aside and, hearing Azula's shout, placed my feet together and stood still. Meanwhile, lightning coursed through the cable, melting it almost instantly. It wasn't a perfect conductor, not copper or silver, for example. Then, I felt the life of all those ambushers extinguish. This was even easier than I expected. I muttered, sensing no life around me except for Azula and the drill's crew. That's what a proper approach and good knowledge of safety measures can do. Damn, 118 earthbenders in one strike. Azula and I have something to be proud of now. Though, extracting them from underground now. I looked around and saw respectable houses, starkly different from the rare shacks seen in the city's outer ring, yet it still reminded me of a kind of ghetto. Now we just have to wait for the army, and then the full conquest of the city will begin. Azula landed next to me, warming me with the heat of her flame. Where are the bodies? She looked around, searching for those we were supposed to have killed, but found no bodies. 118 earthbender corpses are underground, Azula. They all died right there from the electric shock you created that went into the ground. Now, let's just rest, I'm quite exhausted. By then, I had spotted a bench and headed towards it. I sat down and leaned back against the wall of a house. Azula sat next to me, leaning not on the wall but on my shoulder, almost collapsing on the bench. So, I can congratulate you soon, right? You managed to capture a city that withstood all assaults. Even your uncle, the Dragon of the West, great General Iroh, couldn't take it after nearly 2 years of siege, but you achieved much more in less than a week. Azula pulled away from me, and I saw her smile out of the corner of my eye, looking at me. Then she leaned on my shoulder again, wrapping her arms around it, hugging me, and resting her head on me. We did it! Chapter 43, Standing on the shore with Katara, I awaited Aang, tuning into every sensation. It had been a week since Katara's capture, and all this time, she had been confined in one of the drill's cages, designed within to capture and hold important figures we might encounter in Ba Sing Se and who could be useful for something else. As I mentioned before, the engineers tried to account for nearly everything in the drill's design. However, once the Fire Nation army managed at least to enter the city's lower ring and quickly fortified there, I took a rest and realized the time was drawing to a close to fulfill the responsibilities I had taken upon myself. Thus, Katara and I set off in a small boat, practically a dinghy, to the other side of the bay. It was amusing to watch her attempt to use waterbending and do it subtly enough for me not to notice, except I was constantly using a bending block on her, so her efforts were futile. During the swim, I managed to rest and fully recover, so now I felt energetic and refreshed. Azula wanted to send a squad of firebenders with me, but I decided it would be better to go with just the two of us. This way, I could escape if needed and act at full strength in case of an attack by the Avatar, utilizing the full variety of my abilities without witnesses, which I had already ensured and prioritized. "Were you acquainted with Frio, weren't you?" I asked, continuing to wait for Aang. "What?" Katara jerked at my words. "You knew Frio?" "Well, why new? I still know him. We might not see each other, but we communicated very well at our last meeting. He told me about you." "He told you?" "But we thought he was." Katara began to whisper. "Dead?" I finished her sentence questioningly. "Yes, he thought he would die too. He told me what happened to him. How the Avatar killed him, how he survived for a long time in the spirit world, about the instances when he miraculously survived. He told me a lot. And yes, you did kill him. But you could say he resurrected, though that's not quite the right way to put it. He was on the brink of death and life and was a moment from dying. But he survived." "And he didn't kill you?" Katara asked me. "No. Do you think because I'm from the Fire Nation, I necessarily had to be killed? Especially by him?" I asked her, and seeing the surprise on her face, I laughed. "He hated firebenders. Not just benders. He was ready to kill anyone. Aang had to fight him. He was protecting your people from this monster." "Yes, I'm aware," I said, calming down and stopping my laughter, regaining my composure but continuing to smile. It's sometimes amusing to intertwine threads of truth with the nonsense I feed my interlocutor. "By the way, he's known to us as Chimamanda Monster, or the Blood Monster. However, at our meeting, he didn't kill me, nor could he have. His condition wasn't the best. Even at our first meeting, he looked somewhat better." "So, you've met more than once?" Katara was surprised again. "Did I say otherwise? The first time, I returned his arm, and what a coincidence, I found him near death the next. And then, my destiny, which was meant to lead me to meet my current team, began." "Why are you telling me this?" she asked after calming down a bit but still harboring a hint of hatred towards me. "I'm just curious, as his students, have you achieved anything? Or have you abandoned everything he taught you?" I asked her, genuinely interested. "And how do you know? Did he teach you too?" Katara asked me. "Yes, he did. And thanks to his teachings, for example, I can sense you." I shouted towards where I sensed Aang stopping with the Earthbender girl. "How did you know?" The girl emerged from behind a rock. "The same way you do, Earth listener. What's your name, by the way? It's a bit awkward addressing someone without a name." "Toph." "Just Toph?" I asked. "Toph Beifong." "Wow! You're in the company of some notable individuals, Aang." I addressed the Avatar, standing next to Katara with her hands tied. "So, Toph Beifong," I smirked at Toph, "you don't care much for your family, do you?" "What do you mean?" she asked quietly. "Well, telling your direct enemy, a firebender close to a princess, about your famous lineage. Suppose I tell Azula about your family. A little bird flies off, and soon nothing will be left of your estate, and your parents will be at our mercy. What will you do then?" I asked her. "You wouldn't dare," she yelled. "Just touch them, and I'll kill you, got it? Be careful with your turns, Toph Beifong, I might take offense, and you're not the opponent who can compete with me. Only Aang can do that, right? Unfortunately, only in the Avatar state, which he has yet to enter. As for your parents, Toph, I won't promise anything. Maybe I'll tell, maybe not. Maybe something will happen to them, maybe they'll be forgotten." My smirk involuntarily turned into a snarl, as for once, I wasn't controlling my facial expression, and I continued in a hissing voice, though I wouldn't count on that if I were you, since you're part of my enemy's team Toph. Don't worry, we will protect your parents, Aang said to her, I promise. Herein lies the main problem with heroes trying to stand against an entire nation attachments. If you have attachments, they are at risk because you can't be everywhere at once. And this problem extends to the hero's allies as well. You're still such children, not thinking about what you're doing, not considering the consequences, neither short-term nor long-term. You just haven't learned this yet, too little experience, too much naivety. This was exactly what Freo disliked about you and what irritates me so much. Your inability to use your brain even a little. I even feel sorry for Sokka, as he was the only one among you who didn't suffer from this. I fell silent, reminiscing about the day on the barge when the Avatar interfered. That time, his naivety prevented me from finishing the job. Because of it, I ended up in the spirit world. Maybe for the Avatar, it's a peaceful place, or perhaps I ended up somewhere wrong, but for me, it was a real survival school. Even though I learned a lot there, I would kill anyone who says I should thank Aang for it. Most cruelly. In the style of Chimam and Monsta. Phew, got a bit carried away there. Focusing on my body, I suppressed the surge of adrenaline that had been splashing in my blood due to the resurfaced memories. It's frustrating, after all. Everyone present was silent, waiting for me to speak again, while I managed to control the hormones in my body. However, I quickly regained my composure. So, here's your friend. I nudged Katara forward, causing her to involuntarily take a few steps ahead. Her bending is blocked and will be unlocked in about 3 hours. Now get out of here, for your own good. Next time, Aang, it's far from certain that I'll take friends from your harem as hostages. More likely, I'll kill them on the spot. And I'm capable of that, I think you understand, for greater interaction. You can chat with me about my writing experience apart from the comments section. Vandalizer perfectly will. So, I advise you not to come near Ba Sing Se. I can easily sense you, no matter how you hide or disguise yourself. Our next meeting will likely not be so peaceful. Turning around, I headed to where I had left the boat to return to the ship. I wasn't worried about attacks from behind, as I could sense all their movements through vibrations. But they didn't attack and quietly left. 5 hours later, I collapsed in my chair in the drill's cabin, stretching wearily. Travel is exhausting. How did it go? Azula asked. I noticed that everyone else was also listening, waiting for my response. Indeed, Freo was right, I had become a notable figure here. And not just here, it's worth noting. It went better than I could have even imagined. I said with a smile. Chapter 44. As the full-scale assault and capture of Ba Sing Se began gradually, Fire Nation soldiers and benders dispersed throughout the city, patrolling the streets to prevent or minimize potential sabotage by earthbenders, as well as to tackle the inevitable rise in crime within these slums. Captured robbers, thieves, murderers, and members of various criminal organizations were sent to mines and factories, providing us with labor units, reducing the number of criminals in the slums, and increasing the trust of the residents, who saw crime being suppressed on their streets. The lower city was divided into 2 parts. The first part, the border area, was where the troops stationed at the wall to the middle city of Ba Sing Se were making all preparations for further assault while fortifying their positions to prevent earthbender raids from displacing us from our positions. For 2 weeks, order was established in the lower city, and everything was stabilized. Preparations were made for defenses in case of a retreat, roads and locations for tanks and other armored vehicles were prepared, and siege weapons were brought in. Having captured the first ring and the lower city, it made sense to lay siege to the city because, without access to food from the farmlands of the outer ring, soon there would be famine in the middle and upper cities. The people here, as I had long noticed, were not like those of Stalingrad and would not tolerate such conditions, so they would likely surrender quickly. If not, they would soon lack the strength to resist. This time, they wouldn't last 600 days, unless they unexpectedly had several farms or food sources in reserve, then it would be more complicated. In any case, We decided to maintain the siege only as a last resort if none of the other plans worked. For 2 weeks, I could say I rested and also assisted in combating crime. Not that I was a brilliant detective, but a Sherman easily spots another Sherman, so to speak. Especially when you can use vibrational sensing and the sense of life. The latter I use constantly. Vibrational sensing, along with regular vision, though increasingly used, still tires me due to the high brain load. Sensing vibrations already gathers and delivers more information to the brain than sight and hearing combined, so using both vision and vibrational sensing, I get tired after about 3¼ hours without breaks. But the duration is gradually increasing, and I'm getting used to processing such an amount of information. So, I'm already considering, after capturing the city, learning to perceive through another element. But that's for later. Now, I had other matters. Walking down one of the lower city streets, I sensed some unwelcome guests. It seemed they were after my soul. 10 minutes of quick movement later, I found myself surrounded by the Daily. From their perspective, I was in a highly unfavorable position. On their territory, alone, against a large number of earthbending masters. They must know that fighting a large number of Earth Masters, even with Azula as a partner, was hard for me. They had to know, after all, there is special service. So, from their point of view, it's natural to assume I was at a disadvantage. However, a smile never left my face because being alone, which I could feel well with no one from my side nearby, wasn't a minus. It was a significant plus for me since I had no need to hide. Yet, no one rushed into battle, though I was already set for blood and ready to take control of theirs, but only one of them cautiously approached me. "Mr. Garo, if I'm not mistaken," the Earthbender asked. "Oh?" Starting with a conversation? And here I was ready for a fight. "Well, yes, I'm Garo. Did you want something?" I asked him. "Our leader would like to speak with you. We promise we won't harm you." "Ah, yes, I'm going to believe that and happily skip to your boss unknown where. Find another fool. If he wants to talk, he can come to me. I'm not looking for a meeting with him. I hope you'll pass that on. You didn't attack me this time, so I'll pretend I didn't see you here. Now go away before I change my mind." Without saying anything, the Daily agents stepped back, and they all began to leave. The meeting with some leader of the Daily intrigued me, but not enough to rush headlong to visit him, especially alone. Who knows what traps they could use? Even if you're strong, you can be killed. The harder it is, the stronger and more experienced you are. Tuning into my senses, I continued my walk. 3 days later, I sensed Earthbenders approaching again. And for the second time, it happened when there was not a single patrol nearby. Well, when I get back, I'll complain to Azula, and she can scold whoever's responsible. This time, there were 1½ times more agents, and far more than one of them approached me. A somewhat short, not exactly young man with a slight bald patch running from his forehead, hair tied back in a braid, a mustache, and a beard reminiscent of Ozai's, wore black clothing with golden trim along the edges and a long green robe that touched the ground, or perhaps it was just a skirt, I'm not sure. I always preferred pants. "Mr. Garo, I'm pleased to meet you. I apologize for not appearing personally last time. I did not anticipate your apprehension about being surrounded by Daily agents," he said, bowing deeply. "Well, I thought it was a natural reaction. What do you want? Be warned, if what you've come personally to say is insignificant, I'll bury all of you here, though I might capture you alive first. I do not doubt your abilities, Mr. Garo. Unfortunately, many of my people have gone to the spirit world, not believing in your power. I'd like to discuss a potential collaboration with you." "Why are you so pleased?" Azula asked me as I lounged on the bed in her room, where the rest of her team had gathered, with a very satisfied smile. "Azula, I have good news. If everything goes as planned, tomorrow will be the last day of the city's siege," I said, grinning even wider. "Explain," she demanded, freezing in anticipation, as did everyone else. In short, during one of my walks, Long Feng, currently the Minister of Culture and also the leader of the ATLA, contacted me. He beat around the bush for a while, but eventually got to the point. He proposes to betray the Earth Kingdom and, with the ATLA's help, open all gates for us, bring down the walls to the middle and upper cities, and assist us, asking only to retain his power. Really? May raised an eyebrow. And you agreed? Great spirits. May, what's with you? What a great day today is. You've spoken to me for the first time in a week. I feigned shock, jumping off the bed and assuming a fighting stance, though my smile clearly indicated I was joking. Ha, ha, ha. Very funny, May said slowly, watching as her friends laughed and I smiled. Well, seriously speaking, I agreed. I hope, Azula, you don't mind? I asked the still laughing princess, who waved her hand dismissively. See, she doesn't mind. As for him, once we get what we can from him, I'll destroy him. It's not wise to leave someone like him behind. He's power-hungry, charismatic, ambitious, quite intelligent and cunning, plus a capable earthbender himself, I suspect not a weak one. Sooner or later, he will start his own games, and we don't need that. Besides, betray once, and he'll betray again. No, keeping him alive is out of the question. All right, Azula concluded, stopping her laughter. Then I entrust this matter to you, Garo. I hope everything goes smoothly. Ah, I'm already tired of being here. Chapter 45. At precisely 4 a.m, the walls fell, and our army, ready for this moment, moved forward. It was early morning, and many were asleep. Moreover, the defenders didn't expect betrayal from their own ranks, especially not from the strongest earthbenders. Thus, we met almost no resistance. It was a victory. A complete victory of the Fire Nation over the Earth Kingdom. The main city citadel fell, now only guerrillas and minor resistance foci remained, mostly scattered, but they too will disappear over time, having no support, funding, supplies, and so on. I stood on the roof of one of the tall buildings, leaning against the wall and smiling as I watched the unfolding events, with Ty Lee, Mai, and Azula standing next to me. Did we make it? Azula asked, approaching me. It seems so. The city is taken. Our army is now inside. All that's left is to establish order, suppress the resistance, calm the population, and then just hold on. In a few years, the population will get used to the Fire Nation. But that won't be your concern. Our task is to accomplish the first 3 items. Or wait for the arrival of a competent administrator. Then we will have completed our mission. Time for a break? Hooray! Where shall we go? I want to go to the beach. Azula, Mai, Garo, let's go to the beach afterward. Ty Lee said cheerfully. Definitely. But first, we need to finish all the work here. Besides, there's still... I paused, feeling a familiar life force. I can't understand whose life force I felt, but it's definitely familiar, one I've encountered before. It seems I remember. Azula, follow me. I leaped from the spot, using jet bursts to jump over several roofs at once, catching up to the carrier of the familiar life force. I only managed to catch up to them on the main road of the lower city. Them, because there were 2 running, but I only felt one as familiar. When the fugitives emerged onto the main road, I unleashed a stream of fire that arced around them and ignited a circle of earth, preventing their escape. People around screamed and ran away, understanding they didn't belong here. I glided into the fiery circle, and Azula landed almost on the opposite side from me. And in the center stood 2, both of whom I recognized immediately. And Azula too, judging by the looks she threw at them. The Dragon of the West, elder brother of Fire Lord Ozai. It's an honor to meet such a great person as you, General Iroh. And no less a great firebender. As well as the banished Prince Zuko. It's a pity that you both are now declared traitors. But, most of all, I feel sorry for you, General Iroh. Honestly, it was unexpected to find you here. You could at least rejoice at your niece's success. She managed to take the city of Ba Sing Se in less than a month and a half. Yes, indeed, it is an achievement. Congratulations to you, Azula. Oh, thank you, uncle, she said with a smirk, standing in a fighting stance. And what's your name, young man? Iroh addressed me while Zuko looked at us. I am known as Garo. I've heard of you. Perhaps you could let the old man and his nephew go and forget we ever met, he asked, grinning broadly. You know, I don't think we'd be understood if we did that, so... Enough talking. Zuko shouted and hurled a fireball at both of us. Zuko, no! Iroh cried, but he had to deflect my stream of fire immediately, only to have another fire projectile arced at him, which he countered by launching a fireball in return and jumping to send 2 fireballs at me, which I blocked with a fire disc, then quickly returned it to Iroh, who had just exhaled a huge wave of fire at me. The fire disc cut through the wave but diminished, and the elder dispersed it with his hand, gathering the resulting flames and sending a fire whip at me. My fire blades sliced through the fire whip and then transformed into a fireball headed for the elder, met by his ST, which shattered the ball. But then there was an explosion, throwing Iroh back. He landed next to Zuko, who at that moment was being pressured by Azula's fire. I prepared to eliminate the lesser threat, knowing that against the more significant one, this move would be futile. The air around me crackled, and in a moment, I extended my hand with fingers stretched out, from which a lightning bolt obediently and slowly took off, then accelerated to the speed of real lightning. However, just before the lightning bolt left my fingers, Iroh pushed his nephew away. The lightning struck the elder, and I thought it was over, but... The elder absorbed the lightning through his left hand and, quickly doing something, sent it back at me from his other hand. So, that was possible? I managed to think, feeling almost childishly upset. And then I just blacked out. Chapter 46, Everywhere, various colors shimmered, incomprehensible images fitted from side to side, gradually forming clear outlines from a foggy nothingness. Damn it! I said, hearing my own muffled voice. I really didn't want to end up here again. The foggy haze dispersed, and I easily recognized the place where I found myself. The same place I ended up last time as well. The foggy swamp, a habitat for several not-too-dangerous types of spirits, as well as one peculiar creature, me. Right here, in this very place, I woke up last time, from here I began my survival, and now I appeared here again. It seems I'm somehow tied to this place. When I appeared here, the spirits around me started to stir more. Last time, I significantly thinned their ranks before I decided to venture further than the foggy swamp. So, better not to approach the high forests, they really don't like me there, but the dark forest is worth visiting again. Just have to avoid the Shaganlung, last time only returning to my body saved me from it, I reminded myself, but then paused and, after thinking a bit, formulated my thoughts into words. However, it's better to try connecting with my body now. Without moving, I sat down right where I appeared and began to block out all familiar irritants, trying to find what connects me and my body. Here, I can do this without fear, as long as I remember myself here. I'd never met anyone dangerous, and even if I was being chased, no one dared to come to the foggy swamp, leaving me in peace. Something here repelled the others. And the spirits around, they are, you could say, peaceful and foolish, so they won't attack me. How long did I sit like this? I don't know. As before, I encountered the problem of measuring time. The constant fog and dark sky offered nothing to grasp to measure equal intervals of time. But I've encountered this before and have grown accustomed to it, finally coming to terms with it. The first time I ended up here, I faced the problem that my spirit required energy, strength, but whereas it previously received it from the body, now, although I'm connected to it, I don't receive nourishment. That became a problem, and I started to feed on the spirits around. The first spirit was the hardest. Here I have no organs for digestion, and will is key. The first attempt to consume a spirit, even such a passive and peaceful, weak, brainless one, ended in a fierce battle of wills, for even without intellect, these spirits instinctively wanted to live. And they fought. Even the weakest spirit posed a threat to my will, to my soul. But time passed, and the strength of the soul grew. I felt less and less hunger, and it appeared less frequently. However, the small spirits around were no longer enough for me, and I started to hunt beyond the foggy swamp, seeking richer food, covering vast distances, encountering the most incredible forms of spirits with the most amazing abilities. After that, I stopped feeling hunger altogether, realizing that I began generating more energy than I consumed, and I started to explore the world. In the process, I also occasionally absorbed spirits, gaining more and more strength. Bending here couldn't be used as I was accustomed to in the world of the living, but by observing the spirits, I gradually learned to use bending again. It was weaker than in the real world, so I had to compensate for the weakness with a larger amount of mana invested in each action. Perhaps that's why spirits are considered powerful, because ordinary strength here turns into crushing force in the real world. I wasn't the strongest element user here. I had enough strength and skills only for precise strikes on strong spirits. Bending here couldn't be shaped into anything structured, no techniques, only crude application, with minimal control over the element. That's the kind of bending there was here. Unfortunately, exploring the world led me into the territory of an exceptionally strong spirit, a huge snake with the head and legs of a frog, a sharp palisade of teeth, and a frog's tongue. And this spirit was sentient. God knows how long I had to run from it while it played with me, but it only lost me because my body pulled me out of the spirit world. Now I'm here again. But this time, I'm not planning to leave the foggy swamp. At least not now. This time, I'll try to return. I don't want to stay in this world. Maybe it's just my bad luck, but it's too unfriendly to me, so I prefer to live in the world of the living. It seems I've found it. I felt a burning pain in my chest, feeling my body's pain, feeling how I was dying. If only my body could be in water now, my chances of survival would be much higher, but as it is, only my own help remains. I felt the pain more intensely, but at the same time, I felt my body, sensed it better and better, until I hit a barrier beyond which I couldn't pass. Well, this is enough for now. I took control of the processes in the body. Somehow, subconsciously, I again put my body into a state close to hibernation with minimal consumption of the body's resources. Now, consciously managing the processes, I accelerated regeneration to its limit, creating water within myself, minerals that are part of the earth, in small amounts. Unfortunately, I don't know how to create biological components. By the way, this will need to be fixed if I return to the world of the living again. I constantly controlled the regeneration processes, not allowing wasteful expenditure of resources so precious now. However, at some point, I felt an influx of resources into the organism. From somewhere outside, I was receiving a nutrient mixture that went directly into my stomach, and I manually maximized its efficiency, using absolutely everything that entered me. With the arrival of resources, the regeneration processes improved significantly and accelerated since I previously had to use the body's own resources for this, something I desperately wanted to avoid due to the difficulty I experienced in recovering from my first death and journey in the spirit world. So, I took resources from everywhere as carefully and sparingly as possible. I helped myself with bending as much as I could, creating water and minerals, while obtaining biological resources from the mixture that reached my stomach. I don't know how much time passed. I fully restored my body, and now it is whole and completely healthy. Now I feel that trickle of energy owing from the body to me, and from me, a stream of soul energy to the body. But the barrier is still not overcome, and I couldn't understand why. My body is in perfect condition, I am ready to return, but I cannot. What's the reason? I jumped out of the meditative trance and opened my eyes. Still in the spirit world. But something had changed. Something was wrong. Looking around, I realized what it was. The foggy swamp had swallowed more than half of me, and only everything above my navel remained free. In panic, I struck with a stream of fire, trying to hit beneath me, but the effect was minimal, and the process seemed to accelerate 100-fold. An airstream did nothing, ice spikes were completely unnoticed, as were stone ones. Then I used lightning. A scream and screech spread around, deafening me and scattering the spirits around. However, the foggy swamp receded, though not. Chapter 47, You Can't Imagine How Glad I Am That You're Alive. Azula said unexpectedly, continuing to lie on my stomach. So you're awake. And how long have I been lying here? I asked her. 2 days. And before that, your wounds from the lightning took another week and a half to heal. And how long have you been here with me? I asked. Almost the whole time. I only left to give orders to the soldiers. What about your uncle and brother? I remembered them. Uncle saved Zuko from your lightning by redirecting it back at you, but he exposed his back to my strike. He is chained, as is my brother, and they are kept in separate cells. It's good that they're kept apart. What's happening with the city? Everything's NE. The Benders and soldiers are establishing order, fighting crime, and the now sporadic resistance. A governor sent by my father should arrive in a few days, and then we'll head back. I've told father about the role you played in capturing the city and the traitors, so a great reward awaits you at home. Wow, got it. And what about Long Fong? I asked, remembering the one I had to deal with. Nothing. I haven't done anything with him and was waiting for you to wake up. Excellent. I lay relaxed in bed, pondering what to do next. My body is NE, and I feel no discomfort, so I could get up and go right now. I need to think about what I'll be doing in the near future. Garo, how are you feeling? Azula asked, looking into my eyes. Good. Excellent, I'd say. I'm in perfect condition. I could, in fact, get up right now and finish up the remaining tasks. So, you're not feeling any discomfort? Azula smiled. Doesn't seem like it. Excellent, Azula whispered, leaning in to stretch towards me. I didn't resist when she kissed me, placing her hands on my shoulders. On the contrary, smiling inwardly, I responded and embraced her, pulling her closer to me. Now you have a different task. Azula whispered, pausing. I don't mind, I said, smiling and pulling Azula to me again. Mr. Garo, have you finally recovered from your injuries? I am very glad of that. I'm as glad as anyone, Long Fong. I have no doubt about that. Mr. Garo, I have fulfilled my part of our agreement with you. And for almost 2 weeks, I have been waiting for you to fulfill yours. I don't doubt that you simply were not able to do so earlier, so I patiently waited, but now you are in full health, aren't you? Long Fong asked, quickly getting to the question that concerned him. Yes, that's correct, but if I'm not mistaken, there's another part of our agreement that you need to fulfill from your side, or am I wrong? I asked him, standing up to face him. Silence hung in the air, and Long Fong looked at me for about 10 seconds before finally breaking the silence. Yes, you are absolutely right. He waved his hand, and a ATLA agent, who had been standing there from the beginning, waiting for a possible command, as had several other agents, pulled out a large scroll and, taking a few steps, handed it to me. Carefully taking the scroll, I opened it just as carefully. After reading everything written in it, I rolled it back up and tucked it inside my jacket. I want to see this in action, to ensure that the information provided is true and not a forgery. Long Fong took a deep breath and looked at me heavily. Mr. Garo, do you not trust me? He asked. No, of course not. Why would I trust you, in your opinion? I widened my eyes, looking at him. I was hoping to earn at least a little of your trust. I'm afraid that's impossible, simply because it's impossible. I've been deceived once already and I'm not about to fall for the same trick twice. However, I'm still awaiting confirmation of the material written here. This time, Long Fong did not hesitate and waved his hand again, this time a different one. From a dark corner, another ATLA agent came out, leading a bound earthbender before him. He pushed the earthbender forward, causing him to fall to his knees, then circled around and began to do everything exactly as shown and described in the scroll. I carefully monitored both the hypnotized earthbender and the daily agent using all means available to me at the moment. After the hypnotized, full attention was completely quickly generating lightning and accumulating charge, I released it immediately upon readiness, into the swamp. Again a screech, and this time the swamp recoiled far from me, and I felt that I was again free and being pulled towards my body. Well, now I know that in the spirit world, nothing can be trusted and one must never relax. A few seconds of disorientation, and I began to feel life, and then I opened my eyes, seeing the ceiling of some house. Air rushed into my chest, but I felt a weight on my stomach. I raised my head and looked down. Azula. Sleeping Azula. Well, I certainly completed one task. Azula, I dare to hope, is already mine. After that, I closed my eyes and finally completely relaxed. This is no longer the spirit world. Here, I am significant, it won't be so easy to deal with me. And the rest doesn't matter much. Surely, there will be questions about my healing, but that will come later, and now I just want to rest. Concentrated on the hypnotist and his words, the life processes in his body slowed down slightly. I approached closer and could feel that his blood was becoming enriched with a set of hormones, starting from endorphins and ending with oxytocin and vasopressin. On a physiological level, nothing else happened. The hypnotized entered a trance, and his critical thinking was reduced to the absolute minimum, as low as it could possibly go. The hypnotic processing of the earthbender continued for another 40 minutes, after which it came to an end. For another 15 minutes, I made sure of the truthfulness of everything that was happening, talking with the hypnotized and monitoring changes in his state. The client was hypnotized essentially just to follow orders, but I was immediately warned that making him do something unnatural wouldn't work, as the hypnosis wasn't strong and deep enough to suppress the instincts of self-preservation. As with all other instincts, I took out a knife, one of a set of 4 that I always carry with me. I don't use them, but I carry them. Handing the knife to the victim, I looked at him and said, "Cut off your left hand's little finger." "What? No!" "Why?" He began to resist and shook his head, where his instincts now connected with the hypnotic programming. "Have you forgotten? Calm down. You were just recently bitten in that finger by a deadly poisonous beetle, and now the poison is slowly spreading through your body. But since it hasn't spread beyond the finger yet, you need to cut off the finger to save the entire body. That's the only way you'll survive." My calm words pacified the victim, and after a brief consideration, he took the knife and swiftly cut off his finger. Yes, this contradicts the instinct of self-preservation, but not in a situation where preserving it would lead to the death of the entire body. Due to the hypnosis, the body, consciousness, and subconscious believed in this information, and there was no further conflict. In other words, I simply circumvented or even exploited the victim's body's protective mechanism by deceiving it. That's all I wanted to find out from you. Indeed, Ba Sing Se holds incredible secrets. Using some of my abilities, it's entirely possible to enhance the effect of hypnosis or speed up the process, or even both. I started discussing the thought that had occurred to me with myself. "Mr. Garo, our agreement." Long Feng reminded me. "Yes, of course, come back in 2 days. By then, everything will be ready. Just don't be late, I don't want to waste more time than necessary," I casually said and waved my hand, walking back to my quarters. Of course, I hadn't forgotten what I told Azula about this man and wasn't planning to leave him alive. Therefore, tonight, Long Feng will sleep forever, not waking up due to an unexpected stroke. Organizing a delayed death isn't too difficult. The main thing is to do everything carefully so as not to kill on the spot and not let on that you've done anything. Returning to the temporary residence, where I was also being healed, I went to my room. Upon entering, I quickly shed my clothes and headed to bed, wanting to rest from Long Feng and the daily. Besides, "You're back already, Garo?" Azula asked me, lying under the covers. "Yep. Dealt with Long Feng. He won't be bothering us anymore. Today is his last day." How merciless you are, she drawled. Come to me. I'm on my way, my princess. Chapter 48, and hello again, Appa, long time no see. Do you recognize me? I asked the sniffing flying bison as I approached him closer. Judging by the animal's reaction, he recognized me, and although he showed no aggression, his mood was clearly not the best. As soon as I got within a certain distance, he exhaled, and a blast of air knocked me back, slamming me into the wall. The hit was substantial, and landing on my feet, I felt that my mood was not as good as it was when I first entered here. Appa, you're not stupid, right? You understand that one more stunt like that, and things will go very badly for you. I don't want to harm you or make things worse and will even let you go. Personally, you're more likable to me than the rest, so I just don't want to do anything to you. I don't know if Appa understood the meaning of my words, or if my tone conveyed something to him, but he calmed down, and I slowly approached him. Placing my hand on his fur, I began to pet him. I truly intended to let him go. What do I need him for? Exactly, he's of no use to me. Letting him go, he can fly back to his Aang. With him, the Avatar and his, let's say, group have a much better chance of leaving, preferably far away from the city, so it doesn't occur to them that they need to take back the city from the Fire Nation. And if it does occur, it would take them much longer considering the distance they'd have to travel. However, the scroll tied to the bison's horn caught my interest. Who would be so original as to use Aang bisons as messengers? There, calm down, I won't harm you, and I'll let you go very soon. After ceasing to pet the bison, I removed the scroll from his horn and, walking towards the exit, I told one of the Daily agents. Let him outside and let him fly his way. Do nothing to him, do not harm him. Without waiting for a response, I unrolled the scroll and began to read it, meanwhile reminiscing about how I ended up in charge of these problematic agents. Somehow, they came to me and said, this and that, Comrade Garo, command us. And the funniest part was that I saw no preamble to it. Why me? I didn't inquire, simply stating that I would soon be departing, and then asked about their service targets. They had an extensive network of underground tunnels with rooms storing various things. And so, while inspecting these various things, I stumbled upon Appa. And I noticed a scroll tied to his horn. Now, as I read the scroll, I found interesting information about someone named Puthik inviting Aang to the Eastern Air Temple to teach him some doctrine and how to enter the Avatar state. Closing the scroll, I stopped and leaned against the wall, closing my eyes to think over the simple and most crucial question in the soul of a Russian person. What to do? Should I go there, or is it not worth it? What will I gain? After all, I'm not the Avatar, far from it, so the ability to enter the Avatar state is utterly useless to me. Why do I need an absolutely useless burden? Unless I'm to teach the Avatar himself, but that's unlikely. However, if someone possesses such knowledge that can help the Avatar with his unique problem, then surely that's not his only knowledge, and he could teach much more. So, it's worth a try. Maybe I can learn something important for myself from him? Something that will allow me to take another step forward. For hours later, I stood on the balcony of one of the mansions in the upper city, where our group was staying, watching a stream nearby, slightly playing with water currents in the stream. It helped to relax. Garo, are you going to be much longer? We're leaving soon. Ty Lee yelled, entering my room. Yes. Ty Lee, where's Azula? I asked. She's already downstairs. Good. I'll be right there, thank you, Ty Lee. Leaving the stream behind, I headed to join the others. I had no belongings with me, the old and barely holding together clothes, which had been thoroughly soiled, I burned at the first opportunity to go and properly wash up, and then receive new clothes. So, I was now in new, clean clothes, not the rags that had gone through the entire campaign to capture Ba Sing Se. Besides the clothes and some trinkets, for which even a bag wasn't necessary, I had nothing to take with me. And I wouldn't need anything for some time. Downstairs, by the doors, stood everyone else. Even Ty Lee, who had just come to me. Garo, why are you taking so long? The aforementioned asked. Just pondering. And what were you thinking about? Azula asked, not taking her eyes off me. That I'll arrive in the Fire Nation a bit later than you all. What? Ty Lee asked. Why? Azula asked simultaneously with her, expressing her indignation. I want to head to the Eastern Air Temple, I replied with a smile. I've come across information that a very interesting person lives there. Perhaps I can learn something intriguing from this person. So, I'll go there, might stay a bit, and then follow you directly. I hope you won't forget about me by then? I said with a smile. Then we'll go there on our ship. Azula declared, after all, there are no other ships freely available anyway. The Daily have a stash of about a dozen ships in a cave, recovered from the Fire Nation at some point. According to their information, all are in working condition. Azula, calm down, no battles or fights are planned there. I'm just going to meet with someone, we'll talk, I might stay a bit, but then I'll definitely return. With each word, I got closer to Azula and eventually leaned down to whisper in her ear. And when I return, we'll put into practice all your and my ideas that we came up with last night. Azula stood with her mouth slightly open, frozen by my words, then she slowly nodded, still staring ahead. However, after a second, she shook herself, and turning to me with May and Ty Lee looking on, she pointed a finger at me and began to scold. May the spirits forbid, if you perish there, I'll burn you myself on a slow re. She articulated each word clearly, then added, I still need my legs. Yes, of course, don't worry. And since we've settled this, I'm off. I still need to get to the ship. Good luck to you, and don't forget about me. I said finally and headed to the nearest station, where I could take the city's unique train to quickly reach the eastern border of the city and then proceed to the port to board a ship. Honestly, the Daile's compliance is starting to bother me more and more. Why such a desire to serve under my command? Why the eagerness to provide their resources? There are two possibilities. The first is about the cheese and a mousetrap, and the second, they need something from me, but what exactly, they're not yet ready to say. Interlude number 1. Well, it doesn't matter much, I don't need much from them. Thanks for the ship, as I wouldn't have wanted to make the journey on an ice boat. Of course, it wouldn't pose much difficulty for me, but still not ideal. And I definitely wouldn't sail there with Azula or anyone else from our group. Who knows what information might come up during conversations? What if Azula shouldn't know this information? Plus, what if I need to use other abilities, not just those of the Fire Nation? No, I don't want the extra hassle, and it's much easier for me to go alone. And there, who knows, maybe the information won't interest me at all. 3 hours later, I watched the receding shore and the distant, even from here visible, towering walls of Ba Sing Se. Chapter 49, Katara's life changed in an instant when she and her older brother Sokka discovered an ice sphere containing a boy and a large six-legged beast with a vast, wide tail. That day, her destiny took a sharp turn in a different direction. Or was her fate always meant to be this way? Recalling those days, Katara felt a multitude of conflicting emotions. She had found the Avatar, No, Aang and Appa, and she had gained hope that the Fire Nation's tyranny would be overthrown, and, deep down, she hoped to avenge her mother and find her father. But she couldn't deny that it was then their path began to converge towards that day, that moment. Meeting Prince Zuko, leading the South Pole, defeating Zuko, and into the Southern Air Temple. Aang, enraged upon learning his people were wiped out by the Fire Nation, the Avatar state. Then there was Kyoshi Island and their encounter with the Kyoshi warriors, as well as a new twist of fate. Frio, an incredible bender, who resembled the Avatar in mastering not just one, but several elements. Doing what seemed impossible. A waterbender who surpassed all the waterbenders she had seen in the future combined. At that time, it didn't seem special, thinking every waterbender could do such, but at the North Pole, when she was learning from the best waterbender, Master Pakku, she saw that Frio, as her new acquaintance was called, far exceeded her teacher. Especially when she, Sokka, and Aang heard those rumors circulating about a name, Joe, or as he was also called, Kaimamar Monsuda. They visited some of his glorious deed sites. This convinced her that his level of waterbending was unreachable for ordinary waterbenders, as was the battle with him earlier. A fight in which Aang engaged. What Freo did, he helped earthbenders, he saved them, he destroyed firebenders, but the way he did it, it extinguished even the deep-seated thirst for vengeance in Katara's soul. Such cruelty, so much blood, it was too much for the young woman, and apparently, the others couldn't bear it either. Aang intervened, and then Freo showed something that seemed impossible even after everything demonstrated on them. Controlling another's body, another's blood, as Katara later deduced. And then Aang entered the Avatar state again. And all that power, all that strength surrounding Aang. He stood against it, all that force, but the Avatar, being the strongest bender, swept Freo away, far away. We didn't become friends, but he aimed to save us when we were with King Bumi, but in the end, we ourselves fought against him. We never found Freo's body, assuming he had perished, drowned in the waters. When Aang came to, realizing he had killed Freo, it hit him hard. He spent most of his time depressed, and smiles were rare on his face. He told us that the air nomads abhor killing, even for food, and Aang, raised in the air temple, held the same belief. But gradually, he recovered, and by the time we reached the North Pole, he was almost the same Aang who had first met them. A lot happened at the North Pole. The senior teacher didn't want to teach her, saying women's role was healing. Katara was not against learning to heal with waterbending, as Freo often discussed how useful this skill was and how it helped him escape tricky situations. Involuntarily, you start to respect healing. But Katara wanted more. And then she almost compromised Aang but managed to extricate herself from her own created problems. Then the Fire Nation fleet arrived. It seemed to her like she had entered a nightmare, reliving the day her mother was killed, but she did everything she could to help, and even though she wasn't strong enough, she managed to hold off the enemy. And again Aang entered the Avatar state, this time willingly, embodying the mighty ocean spirit, sweeping away the enemy fleet, destroying their ships. That's what it means to be a powerful bender. Everyone had forgotten about Freo, although, in reality, that wasn't the case. Both Katara and Aang continued the meditations that their short-lived partner had shown them, and soon both Aang and Katara began to see successes. But time passed, and they had to leave the North Pole. There, they learned much and gained new skills. And lost something. It seemed everything was going well again, everything was proceeding as planned, and now Aang had mastered waterbending. Although Katara remembered with pride, her achievements were significantly greater, so much so that eventually she became his teacher. Then there was the encounter with that crazy commander of the fortress, the attempt to control the Avatar state, ending with the fortress in ruins. After that day, Sokka was plagued by nightmares, and during the day, he constantly felt anxious. Who would have thought that this feeling would turn out to be like a premonition? Omashu, a city that seemed to Katara an impregnable bastion, standing alongside Ba Sing Se against the Fire Nation's army for 100 years. The sight of this invincible city under the Fire Nation's banners would forever be imprinted in Katara's mind. Seeing her hopes crumble while only Aang maintained determination, they headed into the city. How did it happen that they ended up outside the city with the refugees? Everything happened so unexpectedly and quickly that it merged into a few moments for Katara. And there they were, at the construction site, exchanging the governor's young son for King Bumi, and then they had their first encounter with him. Garo, as he called himself, but Katara felt something familiar in him, though she couldn't understand what exactly. A quick and swift fight ensued. Two firebenders, a boy and a girl, attacked Aang, while she and Sokka were left with only two, but even those two they couldn't defeat. She couldn't, as Sokka was carrying the child and couldn't fight, but he managed to escape while she tried to hold off the two opponents. But a third firebender intervened, attacking Aang with another bender, but the Avatar and that girl somehow leapt away, more accurately, the bender leapt, and Aang was blown away after another attack. A few seconds of bending combat and unexpectedly, Katara loses all her control over bending, followed by a powerful strike to the solar plexus. It seemed to her she was lost in darkness. Breathing was nearly impossible, her eyes wouldn't obey her, shadows danced in them, obscuring all light. She heard Appa land nearby with Sokka, she heard her older brother's conversation with the firebender, she heard everything, but her brain simply couldn't process this information, overwhelmed by pain it was unaccustomed to. Then there was a push on her back, and barely able to move her legs, she took only a few steps when her older brother caught her. The older brother, who had always been her support, who always cared for her, always protected her. Brave, strong, smart. The epitome of an older brother. All these thoughts flashed through Katara's mind in that short moment as she looked more consciously into Sokka's eyes and saw in their reaction that small, bright fireball flying towards them. Then there was pain, which finally overloaded Katara's brain, sending her into unconsciousness. It seemed to Katara that only a few seconds had passed when she opened her eyes, but looking around, she realized a lot of time had passed. Sitting nearby, staring into nothing, was Aang, with Bumi next to him, and in front of them lay a pale Sokka. Sensing something was wrong, Katara immediately rushed to her older brother, but as soon as she touched his skin, she felt the cold emanating from it. No, 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 no. Katara started screaming in a breaking voice, falling into hysteria, as tears streamed from her eyes. Not you, please, Sokka, don't leave me. I beg you, Sokka. Wake up, she cried, while tears flowed in an unending stream. She hugged her brother, but he remained lifeless, and despite all his younger sister's pleas, he couldn't wake up. The spirit world had taken him and didn't intend to return his soul back to his body. Hysteria, that's the only way to describe what happened to Katara next. Tears stopped owing, but she couldn't let go of the last of her family, aside from her grandmother and teacher. How could she look her father in the eyes when she allowed her brother to die? All attempts to heal him were in vain, but Katara herself understood it was too late. Interlude number 2. Bumi left them soon after, at their next stop, helping the 2 remaining members of Team Avatar bury Sokka. Now, feeling death with every beat of her soul, losing one of the closest people to her, Katara could feel all those feelings she had been told about, understand and realize what Freo felt, losing his twin brother and beloved mother in one day. Now, she no longer felt that dragging fear of the enemy's blood she experienced on the prison barge. Now, faced with a choice, she would likely have helped Freo that day, or, at the very least, tried to prevent Aang from interfering. I will kill him, Katara said firmly, after several days of Aang, unexpectedly to both Aang and herself, but then just as confidently continued, feeling her eyes again covered in moisture and tears streaming down. I will kill him at the first opportunity. And I ask you, Aang, not to stop me at that moment, please, for Sokka's sake. Chapter 50, the Avatar team, consisting of 2 people, had to endure a lot. Somehow, they always managed to find adventures for themselves, even without seeking them. Sokka's death hit them harder than it might have appeared to an outsider. Katara was able to come to terms with it after a week, yet she cried every evening, as memories of her brother, memories of that day, would wash over her again and again, whenever she allowed herself to relax. Then they found themselves in that strange swamp. They lost Appa and Momo and were left alone in the midst of the swamp, reminiscent of their time in the cave of 2 lovers. There, they began to see peculiar visions. It seemed they were seeing the deceased, and Katara thought she saw Sokka, trying to tell her something. His mouth moved, she saw it, but couldn't hear his words, couldn't grasp the meaning of his gestures. Only fragments. Be cautious. It's him. Now an enemy. And when he tried to show her something more, she could no longer see him, as if he was swept away by a gust of wind. Who was he talking about? What did he mean? Katara shared with Aang what she had seen, but he too was unable to understand. Then they had no time for further contemplation, as they had to fend off an enigmatic monster, which actually turned out to be just a waterbender who had learned to manipulate plants. Katara remembered that Freo had told her he also possessed such a skill, which made Katara marvel once more, realizing through her own experience how challenging it was. She asked him to teach her too, but during the few days they spent in the swamp with the local waterbenders, she made no significant progress, barely managing to stir the plants. Their journey continued more smoothly until, on the shore near Kyoshi Island, they arrived in a village where a festival called Avatar Day was being held. Everything would have been fine if the village didn't despise the Avatar and didn't burn their wooden effigies on this day. Katara didn't understand what overcame her, but the sight of the Avatar effigies being burned kindled an unprecedented fury and anger within her. She immediately extinguished the flames and was ready to confront the villagers when Aang stopped her, placing his hand on her shoulder. She looked at him and saw him shaking his head. His face was filled with sorrow and sadness, but despite everything, he still had no intention of harming the villagers. Katara ceased and then withdrew the water back into her flask. They didn't linger in this inhospitable village, Aang away on Appa. Then they stopped in one of the numerous cities of the Earth Kingdom. Aang was constantly somber, while Katara tried to forget what had occurred, to detach herself from all of it. Then she remembered the peculiar meditation that Freo had taught her and Aang. It involves renouncing everything happening in the world and focusing on the element. Maybe it was worth a try? Aang often uses this meditation and says that it really helps him feel the energy in the water, his own energy, and the water responds to him better. And the next day, Aang found out that underground earthbending fights were soon to be held there, and he thought that teachers of earthbending might be found there. That indeed happened. A girl, small in comparison to the other benders, demonstrated such a level of bending that she managed to defeat all her opponents. But integrating Toph into the group was challenging. However, eventually, she agreed to accompany Aang and Katara. Katara, hoping to find a friend in Toph, someone besides Aang who could help her stay strong, found Toph initially reluctant to engage. But as the saying goes, water shapes its course through persistence. Several days passed, after which their relationship gradually improved, and Toph and Katara became friends, even best friends, after sharing their life stories one night, which brought them closer and laid the foundation for their enduring friendship. Thus, Toph learned about the history of the Avatar team, about Katara's older brother, about Freo, about all their adventures. To some extent, these adventures could not but be judged by the blind girl, as she could understand the motives of one of their former team members. Moreover, how could she not empathize when her friend, according to her own words, starts experiencing similar emotions, feelings, desires? Teaching Aang earthbending was a challenge, and then Toph also learned about the unusual method of learning bending through special meditation. Initially, it seemed amusing to her, but stories about a guy who managed to learn both waterbending and earthbending without being the Avatar, plus Aang's personal sensations. All this persuaded Toph to give it a try herself. It wasn't immediate, but she managed to do it quite rapidly. At least the sensation of the Earth's energy, as Aang described that feeling, she felt in just 4 days. And then Toph herself realized that this method of learning bending truly works because of just the feeling of one's element, one's power, and the power hidden in the earth. It already made Toph stronger. No, not stronger, better. Then she began to inquire about who this Freo was, what was known about him. And she got a comprehensive answer just by learning one of the nicknames of the former member of the Avatar team. The Blood Monster. Chimamanda Mansuda. A person, rumors of whom had reached her family and Toph in particular. Then from Katara, Toph learned about his abilities, their diversity, and the mastery he achieved in each area. And according to Freo himself, as told to Katara, all this was achieved through meditation alone. And then Toph pondered. If Freo did the impossible and became the greatest waterbender, as he is now rumored to be, at least the strongest for sure, then why couldn't Toph do the same? No, not to become famous as a bloodthirsty monster, but as the strongest and greatest earthbender. A smile appeared on Toph's face and transformed into a full-blown grin. The greatest earthbender, the first to conquer metal. Traveling further, stopping, and constantly learning, the Avatar team reached a vast desert. In one of the cities where the team stopped, they stumbled upon an explorer who was waiting there in the hope that someone would dare to go with him in search of the great library. Professor Zay, as this explorer was called, offered them help in his search, but Toph was against it, saying that it would just be a waste of time. She was not eager to stay in the desert any longer than necessary, as she could not fully use her vibration-sensing abilities there. However, having reached a new city on the border of the desert, where they planned to spend the night, the entire Avatar team was captured when their food and water were drugged with a sleeping potion before bedtime. When they woke up, they were in cages. And a strange, unusual feeling has haunted Aang since his awakening. He couldn't understand what it was, having never felt it before, but soon he sensed the absence of something, realized that something had been taken from him. "Where's Appa?" Aang yelled, jumping up in his cage, but the people managing the strange sailboat for traveling across the sand paid no attention to him. Aang's desperation was short-lived. Appa had always been with him since childhood, ever since he was a little bison. They had never been apart. Never! And this feeling of loss, that feeling awakened new sensations, new emotions in him, which, if they had been present in Aang before, were insignificant, only occasionally turning into a raging, all-destroying hurricane. Now, rage, anger, hatred, malice, resentment, sadness, despair, all threatened to become an incredible frenzy, but unlike before, these feelings grew gradually, step by step saturating the Avatar's mind. And they reached their climax. A bright glow burst from the Avatar's eyes and mouth, his tattoos illuminated with an otherworldly light, and the air masses within hundreds of meters around, previously still, came into motion. On a calm, windless day, the sand began to move. Grains of sand moved in a huge circle, but still barely noticeable. But with each second, huge masses of air began to move faster and faster, carrying more and more sand with them. The boat stopped. The sandbenders, who were the main driving force of their transport, felt the terrifying power, the desire to destroy, tear apart, scatter, incinerate, crush. The desire to kill. All the sandbenders turned to the source of these feelings and saw him. The bars of the cage simply bent from the sphere of super-fast rotating air and, eventually unable to withstand, just burst apart, releasing the enraged Avatar. Hundreds of tons of sand, lifted into the air, already blocked out all sunlight, cutting off access to it. Everyone present was trapped in a storm ocean of multimeter walls of sand moving at incredible speed. If anyone were caught there, their ash would be sanded away by the particles, leaving only a skeleton in the air within a few minutes. The fear experienced by the sandbenders is indescribable. A large part of them turned gray that day, witnessing this all-destroying power. Aang's fury subsided very quickly. He simply took control of his emotions, and soon the Avatar state left him. It left, but the feelings that awakened it remained, simmering in the Avatar's mind, finding support in Aang's memory. The arguments of a young sandbender, backed by such emotions, could no longer be ignored and completely suppressed. The sandbenders answered all questions. Soon Aang knew where they had sold Appa. Just the thought of it again made that cocktail of emotions and feelings tremble, threatening to explode again. But arriving at the location yielded nothing. The moving caravan that had bought the captured Aang bison had left no traces and disappeared in an unknown direction. Apathy completely enveloped Aang, and the further journey didn't register much in his memory. An attempt to board a ferry, but they were stopped, meeting an old acquaintance Suki, telling her about Sokka's death. Shock, disbelief, anger, tears. Aang understood what Suki felt, accepted it, but it did not elicit any response from him. As if all emotions had burned out in that torrent of feelings. Not boarding the ferry, they met a family with no choice but to cross the deadly Serpent's Pass. They completed their journey through this dangerous place without losses, but towards the end, the refugee family's woman went into labor, which had to be delivered right there, on the spot, but Katara had the necessary knowledge and abilities, so everything went well. The birth of a child, new life, the beautiful moment of new life's arrival. It was this event that allowed Aang to shed the veil of apathy that had enveloped his mind. However, his happiness was short-lived. As soon as they emerged from behind the rocks, they encountered an old acquaintance. "Katara, be careful!" Toph suddenly shouted. Chapter 51, Azula, a young woman with black hair, stood next to a fountain in the palace courtyard where she lived, entranced by the ripples on the water for the past 15 minutes. "Azula, what are you doing here?" asked Ty Lee, the Fire Nation princess's friend. "Nothing," the princess turned away from the water, looking back at her friend, just thinking about how father would react if Garo is late. "Don't worry, Azula, he's strong and won't just disappear," Ty Lee replied, shaking her head. "Listen, Azula, do you know why there are so many guards and soldiers on the island? Is an attack expected? I asked father before leaving him, and he said an eclipse is approaching and we need to prepare for a possible attack. It's the only day in many years when the Fire Nation's power vanishes, so we need to be ready for anything. And it seems to me that father fears this day. He looked very tense the whole time I was talking to him." "I see. Hey, Azula, what's your relationship with Garo like?" Ty Lee asked, moving closer to Azula's face with a wide smile, squinting her eyes like a pleased cat. "PFF, ha ha." Azula couldn't help but laugh, causing Ty Lee to step back, trying to understand why she was laughing. Sorry, Azula said, barely holding back her laughter. "You just looked so funny and cute just now that I couldn't help it." Ty Lee thought to herself for a few more seconds but returned to her question. I like him," the princess eventually answered, after a brief pause. "I'm very grateful to him for what he's done for me, and, I think I love him." Azula would hardly have been able to say such a thing to anyone else, but to her friend, whom she had known since childhood and who had always helped her, she managed to confess, even if it took some effort. "Wow!" Ty Lee exclaimed in surprise. "Just don't tell anyone, okay?" Azula quickly said. Nobody, I got it." Ty Lee immediately responded, continuing to smile joyfully. The two young women continued to stand in the garden, talking about everything. However, at some point, one of the firebenders entered the garden and informed the girls about a message from a messenger hawk. Paisho was a very smart young man. However, despite his intellect, he wanted to see something more in his life beyond medical school and the hospital, so he decided to stop his studies and join the Fire Nation's soldiers. Unfortunately, he wasn't born a bender, so he couldn't hold a high position in the army, but he wasn't particularly ambitious about it. Paisho's parents were well off and, despite not liking his decision, they tried to help their only son and managed to influence his placement. Thus, he ended up as a guard in a prison recently built specifically for a well-known and very powerful waterbender. At that time, he wasn't as famous as he is now, but he was already well known. Few, however, fully understood his danger. So when the Fire Nation was shocked by the news of the losses incurred by the soldiers and firebenders in capturing just one waterbender, Paisho's parents regretted their decision, but it was too late to change his placement. However, days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. No troubling news came, and gradually his parents stopped worrying about their son's life. Paisho, although dissatisfied with his posting, philosophically decided that everything happens for the best. And then he became the overseer of the now legendary blood monster, which initially scared him. However, after hearing the story of this person, whom they called Joe, he came to admire him. Paisho was smart, but he always admired stories of genius individuals. His first idol was Princess Azula, a genius celebrated among the entire Fire Nation, despite being much younger than him. And after learning Joe's story, he realized that Joe was an even greater genius because, despite everything, Azula had teachers, a lot of teachers who greatly helped her, while the inmate of the cell Paisho guarded was self-taught, having no teachers, mentors, or even advisors, and although he was a psychopath and madman, he achieved everything on his own. Soon, Paisho began to miss his family terribly. Not just his parents, but also his wife, daughter, and 2 sons. He had already felt a desire to return to them, but he had made his decision, and besides, it allowed him to provide well for his loved ones. But lately, his desire to return to them grew so strong that he occasionally thought about just leaving to be with them, to escape. However, reason always prevailed. And then he spoke to the prisoner again. It seemed they were not just a prisoner and a guard, but old acquaintances. Although they had indeed known each other for a long time. Mentioning a birthday and a gift, if you can call a full cup of water a gift. However, as Paisho later recalled, it was that very cup of water that saved his life, that changed his fate. A cup of water that crossed out Paisho's death. Then came that dreadful day. At first, he didn't understand what he was feeling, some indescribable sensation, and then, in the next moment, his body was paralyzed by an alien will. He couldn't move a muscle, he couldn't even scream. He was simply not allowed to, just like his new partner. Then Joe emerged from the volcano's mouth, from where the cell was located. Afterward, he was left alone. He lost consciousness, simply blacked out, but when he came to, he saw that his partner had been reduced to a dried-up mummy, the skin tight and thin over the bones, clad in the armor of the Fire Nation. Fear took hold of him, and he ran to the others, but upon reaching the kitchen and seeing what remained of the other firebenders and soldiers, he vomited on the spot. In a panic, he ran down the corridor, stumbling over corpses or their severed parts, hoping to find someone alive, but he saw only blood, bodies cut to pieces, limbs detached from bodies, organs lying separate from their bodies, and so on. Paisho felt he was on the verge of madness, but he held on with the last of his strength. How he survived the few days that passed until the arrival of the supply ship, which took him away from the island that had become a grave for dozens of firebenders and soldiers, he could never say. From that moment on, he could never sleep properly, waking up from nightmares. When he reunited with his loved ones, they barely recognized him. He was jittery, his eyes darting around, bags under his eyes from lack of sleep, his hair sticking out in all directions, creating, along with everything else, the image of a man gone mad. But gradually, being with his loved ones, he calmed down. It seemed that everything had passed, and only the nightmares at night indicated that what he had experienced was not a fragment of his imagination. But a long time later, when he returned to his medical studies and, having completed them, was sent to the front as a field medic, Paisho realized the past had returned. Just one word was enough to destroy the dam of tranquility that had been built over months. It once again turned the life of the young man who had endured so much. First echoed in his head over and over again, awakening memories of those days, details of which he so desperately wanted to forget forever. The nickname Paisho had given, not knowing Joe's name, now known as the Blood Monster. A nickname known only to him. After all, no one else had survived. No one knew they had called him that. Sliding slowly down the metal, trying to gather his thoughts, Paisho tried to understand the connection between the Blood Monster and Mr. Garo. What linked them? Were they acquainted? No, he didn't just remember the nickname, he recalled the first. But that was impossible. Garo wasn't Joe. Paisho could swear on it, but he was sure he was seeing a different person. Moreover, Joe had mastered waterbending, while Garo wielded rebending. These are different and opposite elements. He couldn't be the Avatar. The description of the Avatar was known to every firebender and soldier, so Paisho was certain of this. Days passed, and news reached Paisho about the ongoing battles, how Princess Azula and her team, including the renowned among soldiers and firebenders, Garo, distinguished themselves. However, the young ELD medic became increasingly consumed by doubts, and then a firm belief formed that Garo and Joe were somehow connected. How? He couldn't say, but he was absolutely sure of it. Nightmares haunted him increasingly with each night. In dreams he was visited by all those who had served as guards in that prison, where they met their deaths, and he survived. They told him to do the right thing, and so, one day before the final capture of Ba Sing Se, a messenger hawk EW away from Phoenix Island, Paisho decided to do what he believed was right. Chapter 52, Captain Pei Chin of the Fire Nation's heavy vessel reread the scroll bearing a message from the Fire Lord, his brow furrowing further with each reading, causing the crew of one of the largest ships to try their best to stay out of sight of the captain. Not only was he a person of great influence, but he was also known as a very powerful firebender. Although far from the Fire Lord in status, his power was sufficient to make a statement. "Captain, the Eastern Air Temple is on the horizon," reported a soldier approaching the captain, who then continued, "Shall we maintain our course towards it?" After rolling up the scroll, Pei Chin looked at the soldier, who appeared ready for anything, even death, before gazing towards the horizon. There, slightly to the right of their course, in the distance, were the cliffs and shores of the Eastern Air Temple. The destination they had been sailing towards all this time. "Yes, maintain course towards the Air Temple." Turning, the captain headed into the ship, and walking through the corridors, entered one of the many cabins. This cabin was larger than standard and could accommodate a dozen people. Currently, it housed those who were to be dispatched to the Eastern Air Temple on orders from the Fire Lord. These mercenaries. I've heard of each of them, even met one. They are all strong and dangerous. Together, but will they be enough? Pei Chin thought to himself. "Gentlemen, we will soon make landfall at our destination. The target is located in the Eastern Air Temple, at least he was there until very recently. You all know what you need to do. The ship will wait 2 kilometers off the coast for 2 days. If you do not return by then, we sail back." No one responded. They all knew that this mission was sanctioned by the Fire Lord himself, and though they were mercenaries, they were still citizens of the Fire Nation. Leaving the cabin, Pei Chin once again took out the scroll with the message and the Imperial family's seal. The orders were simple and clear. Capture Garo, who, as stated in the message, is suspected of being the elusive blood monster. In case of resistance, eliminate. Although the mission was straightforward, it did not ease the captain's apprehension. From the beginning, he had a feeling that this mission could be his last, so he had taken every possible measure to stay as far from danger as possible. Garo had already become a hero of the battle at Ba Sing Se, where he personally defeated one enemy after another alongside Princess Azula. There, he became known as a genius firebender, very powerful, who even bested Princess Azula in combat. He was the master of blood-red flames. He had mastered lightning better than anyone before. He could even stand nearly equal to the Avatar when at his peak. And now they were to capture him. Without accusations or anything of the sort. Simply to capture. It was clear to anyone with half a brain that Garo would resist. Meaning, it would be a fight to the death. But that was the best-case scenario. Far worse would be if he truly was the blood monster. While the mercenaries might have a chance to survive against Garo, being strong firebenders themselves, some even incredible fighters and benders with unbelievable abilities. But if Garo is the blood monster, it meant he had achieved the impossible and mastered 2 elements, especially those that were opposites, at the very least. Water and fire. How is this possible if he is not the Avatar? No one understands. However, it meant that all of Garo's incredible abilities were added to all the unimaginable abilities of the blood monster. In that case, the mercenaries would stand no chance at all. Captain Pei Chin understood this. The mercenaries understood this. And so, everyone was maximally focused, tense. They all wanted to survive, but the fame of this cruel and bloody killer, as well as an excellent fighter and bender, preceded him. 3 hours later, a dozen mercenaries disembarked, while the ship sailed further away, preparing to anchor for a couple of days. Not even a day passed. Just as the sunset began, bathing the shores of the Eastern Air Temple in red light, a lone silhouette of a man stood in the distance on the shore. He wasn't noticed immediately, but after Pei Chin was informed of the man on the shore, the ship's captain looked through his telescope at the figure standing on the shore. Their gazes met. Through the telescope, a gift from his now-deceased grandson, the captain saw, though with difficulty, the man who was looking straight at him. At least, the captain was ready to swear by it. Captain Pei Chin's back was covered in cold sweat as he put away the telescope, and turning around, he shouted to the crew. "Quick, lift anchor and full speed ahead. Course directly opposite the island." "Captain," shouted one of the sailors. Pei Chin turned and was about to ask what was needed from him when he saw the reason for the shout himself. As if waiting for these commands, the man on the shore raised his hand upward, and from his hand, a 15-meter wide stream of white flame, shining seemingly brighter than the sun, was released. At its highest point, the fire began to stretch back towards the ground, twisting at the edges, and it seemed as if the stream of fire was turning inside out, forming a huge sphere of white light, which was, in fact, incredibly hot. The ocean water near this sphere began to boil from the sudden heat just by being nearby. The vegetation burned within the first few seconds, and now, on the seemingly baking sand, stood only this one man, above whom burned a small sundae. Everyone on the ship froze, watching something they could hardly believe. They were watching what was now attempting to kill them. The fire began to compress, and within a few seconds, only a 2-meter sphere of rotating white flame remained in his hand, which began to stretch into an ellipsoid, becoming more pointed on one side. And then Garo, as it became clear to Captain Pei Chin, launched his weapon, aiming it at the ship. Time seemed to slow down as Pei Chin watched the 4-meter-long spear of pure flame cover the distance to the ship meter by meter. Regardless, the thrown fiery spear reached the ship. Whether there was an explosion or not, his crew would never know. The white flame instantly engulfed them, burning their flesh and blood, which vaporized instantly, bones burned away, and the ship at the point of impact heated up so rapidly that the metal melted as if it were made of water. The ship was destroyed. Chapter 53. Are you the one who wrote this message? I asked the skinny, one might even say emaciated, old man with a huge white beard, mustache, and long eyebrows, though his head was completely bald, not having a single hair. The bald old man turned to me. Yes, I wrote it. But I was not expecting you. What brought you to me? I was curious. How could you possibly teach an avatar to enter the avatar state, not being an avatar yourself? I asked, sitting down next to him on the ground. One does not need to be an avatar to learn that. And what is that? I asked. Have you ever heard of chakras? The old man asked me, as birds landed on him and various animals were always nearby. I've heard of chakras, but I know nothing about them. I would be very glad if you could share this information with me. Oh! With pleasure. I am always happy to teach someone else about the teachings of chakras, as long as you yourself are willing to learn. Come with me, I'll show you something. What is fear? It's an emotion based on negative experience, which is extremely important for survival. But it also hinders the process. Fear, a phenomenon of instincts, and sometimes this phenomenon only hinders, not helps. What are chakras? As Puthik, the old man himself explained, chakras are centers of power and consciousness located inside the human body and connect its metaphysical and biophysical energies. Each of them is closely linked to some human emotion and can be opened or closed, depending on his mood or state. The 7 chakras are located along the vertical axis of the human body, but in different organs. If all of them are opened, then the life energy chi will flow freely through the body. Fear, this is the emotion that closed the first chakra, the earth chakra. It is responsible for survival. What does this mean? I couldn't understand. As much as Puthik tried to explain, I just couldn't grasp what opening this chakra provides. However, I decided that I would understand it through my own experience. And here I am, for days sitting in meditations. Not my own, to which I had come by myself, of a different sort. And I was helped by a decoction that caused strong hallucinations. 3 days of constant hallucinations, this is a very big challenge. However, eventually, I found myself on top of a huge cliff, and in front of me stood Aang. I understood that these were hallucinations, understood that I was in an inadequate state, but part of my consciousness ignored reason and succumbed to irrational fear. Weak, but noticeable. And then Aang turned to me. And in the next moment, all his tattoos lit up, as did his eyes. It became clear that he was about to attack me. I attacked first. Fire burst from my hands, streams clenched, rushing towards the avatar, and oxygen intensified the fire, making it even hotter. But the fire died down, and Aang did not even sweat, and showed no signs of damage. I attacked again and again, fire in huge streams burst from my hands, water collected in the air exploded into steam and then immediately froze, turning into ice, which with sharp spikes sought to pierce the enemy, stone spears rushed at the opponent, accelerated by air currents, and blades of compressed air continuously tried to slice the avatar into many little avatars along with water threads. But minutes passed and I realized that all my efforts were in vain. My attacks meant nothing, the avatars simply ignored all my efforts. Fear in me grew with each second, until at some point it grew to such proportions that it paralyzed me. I was afraid to move, I was afraid to breathe, I was afraid to live. The fear of death engulfed me from head to toe, completely, leaving nothing more, and only for a brief moment, through the veil of death, I saw the avatar raise his hand, and releasing it, send a huge wave of fire at me, which seemed to cover the entire horizon. I was afraid. Afraid of everything and anything. At that moment, I knew nothing but fear and terror. I closed my eyes, preparing for the death I feared. I closed my eyes, preparing to feel the fire I feared. And at that moment, in my mind, I noticed a small spark that was not fear. It was like the light of a small candle in absolute darkness. I focused on this spark and felt something familiar. And in the next moment, this spark, as if it grew and devoured everything around, turning all fear into something close, yet different. Live! 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 This thought pounded in my head non-stop, and I couldn't ignore it. Fear disappeared and turned only into the desire to survive. Opening my eyes, I saw the fire approaching me, but I stepped back and fell from the high cliff, the bottom of which could not be seen. I was falling, and the fiery tsunami passed over me, doing me no harm. And the avatar EW after me. Discharges pulsed in my hands. They became more and more, but the avatar still EW at me determinedly, striving to catch me in the fall. There was no land beneath me. There was only me, the fog around me, and the avatar, ing after me, striving to kill me. Am I afraid of the avatar? Is this my fear? No! I'm afraid of being weak. To be not strong enough to deal at least one significant blow to the enemy. And the avatar, the strongest of all opponents I've encountered in this world. He is a projection of my fear. I'm not afraid of weakness, no, not anymore. It's pointless. I will become stronger, I will destroy every fear. And I will destroy the avatar at any cost. Thick lightning bolts ripped from my hands, followed by streams of fire, amplified by the air. I put all my strength into one strike. Everything, for the goal. However foolish or silly it may seem. It's my goal. My path. My meaning. And I will follow it. The stream of lightning hit the avatar, and the fire that followed destroyed the already dead greatest bender. And the next second, I took a deep breath of clean and fresh air. Looking around, I realized that I am still in the Eastern Air Temple. I realized that it was all just hallucinations. Chapter 54, the opening of the chakras can be likened to the sensation of all the pipes, through which water flowed, being suddenly cleansed. The water, or in this case, mana, became crystal clear, obedient, so simple to control. It felt as though previously I struggled to change the direction of a river by a few degrees, but now, suddenly, I could twist and turn it as I pleased. I felt not only my mana but all that surrounded me. It owed through me, through my chakras, becoming mine. Slowly but surely, it filled me. And the last, the seventh chakra, produced it on its own. Just a little droplet, but it was noticeable. Understanding and realizing what chakras are was harder than it might seem. I managed to open the first chakra. To do so, one needed to overcome and let go of their fear, to accept it. Thus, I accepted my fear of the avatar. An insurmountable force, nearly impossible to overcome, but I didn't resign myself to fear, instead, I absorbed and overcame it. And the strongest feelings at that moment, like lava, burned through all obstacles and opened the chakra. However, as the great sage Puthik explained, each chakra requires its own set of emotions. The second chakra, the water chakra located in the sacrum, requires overcoming guilt. Did I feel guilt? Oh yes. How many nights did I spend tormented by thoughts that if I hadn't run away with my brother, I could have killed the fire soldiers, that if I had trained more, my brother would have still been alive, that if I had acted differently, somehow, I might have been able to save my brother, my mother. The hallucinations plunged me headfirst into these thoughts. Honestly, I never suffered as much as I did at that moment. Then I understood what hell is. Hell is not a place where you are tortured and made to suffer. It is the place where you torture yourself. Where you stew in your own juice of guilt, suffering, experiencing anguish because you are guilty. And I lived through hell. It seemed my soul was dissolving itself, consuming consciousness, wanting to rid itself of this source of pain. Slowly, gradually, but my own soul was killing me. But at some point, it seemed I saw them. Two silhouettes. As they approached, I saw such beautiful facial features, which had been etched into my memory since childhood. Mom. And with her was my brother. Just as little as I had seen him last time. They said nothing. Not a single word. They didn't try to tell me anything. To convey. To judge or explain. They weren't angry with me, which I had feared deep down. Approaching me, as I couldn't even move, Mom smiled softly and hugged me, while my brother pressed against my stomach, hugging my waist where he could reach and embrace me. At that moment, I felt boundless joy. Joy from the fact that they didn't judge me. Weren't angry with me. With each new trial, I discovered a new facet of myself. Incredibly, I changed. I accepted new, or rather, rejected facets of my personality and soul. And I felt with each time, how my power changed. Became purer. Stronger. More obedient. Power becomes me. And I become my power. Shame, overridden and overcome with love. Mourning for relatives, despite the recent encounter with them, which was overcome by love, or something similar, that I felt towards Azula. Lies, which I accepted and dissolved in truth. Brain and mind illusions, which led me astray in their labyrinths, seemingly for months, years, decades, and centuries, until I suddenly realized that it was just an illusion, an illusory world created by my mind. An ash of enlightenment burned away this illusory world. However, ultimately, I was confronted with the last obstacle. The seventh chakra. The thought chakra. The chakra that generates mana itself. And I couldn't. Simply couldn't. No matter how much I deceived myself, no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't let go of everything. All attachments. My mother, even though she had passed away. My brother, who was with my mother. And now, as I've come to realize not so long ago, Azula. I didn't want to lose everything I had gained over this time. Now, sitting on the vast and narrow staircase carved into the stone, feeling the energy around me being absorbed and becoming mine, I realized how much I had changed over time. Not just now, but throughout my life. As it may seem otherwise, I changed every day. Gradually, little by little. However, if at the beginning of my path as an Avenger, I only desired power, now, despite still desiring power, I have found a clear goal to which I am heading. I have found people with whom I feel good. And whom I don't want to let go or lose. These thoughts have been swirling in my head for days now. I couldn't come to a decision. Couldn't make a choice. Couldn't decide to lose what I had now, as I couldn't decide to part with what had led me through life in the past years. What made me who I am now? Puthik couldn't offer any advice. As he said, over time everything will resolve itself. Either I will make a choice, or circumstances will make it for me. And I understood that he was completely right. He's surprisingly wise for someone who's been smoking this world for 150 years and dabbling with hallucinogens. And I perfectly understand that, by not making a choice and leading it to chance, I am now looking for that very chance. Who seeks, always finds. Damn true statement. I thought, feeling some threat and turning my head to the right, where I sensed an approaching concentration of life. Far on the horizon, I could make out a ship rapidly approaching the temple. And this ship belonged to the Fire Nation. One might say it's Azula or her emissaries. However, I sense the threat all too well. My senses have sharpened lately, including the supernatural ones. And I'd bet anything that this ship is clearly not coming with good intentions. Something has definitely happened and I am unaware of it, I thought, as I rose up the steps to find Puthik and took him to safer places. I feel the danger emanating from this ship. A couple of hours later, I watched with all my senses a group of people who disembarked onto the shore from a lowered boat. And some of these people I knew well. Mercenaries. And of the kind dead or alive. I had encountered a couple of them in battle when I was destroying firebenders not far from them and they interfered. One of them even managed to seriously harm me before fleeing. Though it's noticeable that he now has a prosthetic in place of his second arm. One of the few who survived an encounter with me, though almost nobody knows about it. The company of mercenaries silently and without speaking moved deeper into the territories and soon gathered to split up when my will and bending froze their movements, subjugating their blood and preventing them from moving. Well, I didn't think they'd send the best mercenaries after me. Maybe you'll be kind enough to tell me yourselves why such as you, I was saying, but the next moment after the last word I had to lean my head back, noticing with my eyes how a narrow beam of energy, heating the air in its path, passed me and stopped a couple of centimeters from my face, beginning to transform into a fiery explosion sphere due to the instant heating of a small point of air to immense temperatures. The explosion would have been very powerful, but the fiery sphere, instead of continuing to grow, started spinning and began to shrink until it diminished enough and then simply extinguished. A wave of my hand and condensed water from the air froze on the forehead of the fire assassin, covering his third eye. So they sent you to kill me, and you, Aaron, haven't come up with anything new since our last encounter, have you? I asked the demolitionist. You, affirmed the assassin, now deprived of the ability to use explosions safely for himself. Aaron, I said, as my face began to change, taking on a completely, seemingly different appearance, my own native look, it's me. And I think you all know that I'm not a good girl and will find out what I wish. The question is, will you suffer in the process? And believe me, I have a very rich practice in this matter. TSK, what a waste! At that moment, a creature hiding in the vegetation, a mix between a dog and a mole and VE times as large, decided to attack me and rushed at me at full speed. However, a few strides later, its paws landed on unexpectedly soft soil, which they sank into under its own weight, about 1/4 meter deep, and a moment later solidified back into the state of stone. June, if I'm not mistaken? Sorry, last time we didn't have much time for chatting. Well, you know, you tried to kill me, or kidnap me. I wasn't really paying attention to that part, and I was fighting off the poison in me and trying to kill you. Anyway, I'm not sure I remembered such a beauty's name correctly. But your doggy, I remembered just perfectly. I struggled long to develop an immunity to the paralyzer. At that moment, the bounty hunter Shortcomings shot its tongue at me, which was covered in saliva with strong paralytic properties. However, I caught the tongue with my hand and, condensing water from the air, nailed the tongue to the ground with an ice spike. A painful roar spread through the area from the Shortcomings, while I wiped the animal's saliva on Aaron's metallic prosthetic. How did they even convince you to take me on again, June? Or did you decide to settle scores for the parting gift I left you? I ran my fingers over the rough scar from a steam burn on the right side of the mercenary's face. So, ladies and gentlemen, you've engaged an opponent far beyond your level. And now you're in deep trouble. I won't lie, I've recently realized how much I dislike lies, though I acknowledge it as an effective weapon in some cases, so I'll tell you straight, you're all going to die. However, the question is, how quickly will you die at my hands? Believe me, I can prolong this moment for a very long time. Well, does anyone want to gossip with me? 2 minutes later, the first scream of immense pain spread across the island, but the ship was too far to understand that nothing good awaited it. Chapter 55. Looking at the spot where the ship I had destroyed had been just moments ago, I pondered what to do next. Now, the Fire Lord at least suspects who I really am. Judging by his reaction, he didn't take kindly to that information. This leaves me with a question: what about Azula? Lifting my gaze beyond the ocean, I spotted a tiny dot moving westward. A messenger hawk? Instantly generating and accumulating a charge in my hands, I released it as lightning towards the bird. However, it was too far away, and I missed it. A second attempt. Another! None of the lightning strikes hit, and the bird seemed to accelerate. Annoyed, I spat and turned around, ascending on white flames, bypassing the ladder. I headed straight for Puthik. I needed to say goodbye. After all, this man commands deep respect from me, and it would be rude to just leave. Puthik? I called out to the slim old man as I approached. You finished. The screams were even audible from here. Frio. You know I do not condone violence and murder, he said to me, looking at me sadly. Forgive me, but my life has been such that death and violence, blood and pain have become as commonplace to me as meditation is for you. You of all people should understand that everyone has their own path, their own destiny, their own duty. Some become sages, like you, while others become monsters, the kind that frighten children, like me. We exist, and that's the way of the world. I understand perfectly, Frio. You're leading me then? After a short pause, the old man asked. Yes. Though I couldn't complete my training with you, what I've learned has given me a great deal. Thank you. Take care of yourself and the teachings I've passed on to you. Now go. I want to rest. Puthik is a very friendly and sociable person, but he is very old and therefore often rests and meditates. I didn't want to disturb the old man further, so I left the room where he was and headed to the cliff. I need to meet with Azula. Approaching the cliff, I took another step forward. After free-falling for a few meters, I took a deep breath and with a sharp, concentrated, powerful, dense stream of fire, I shot out from my feet and hands backward, turning my fall from vertical to horizontal flight. And who might you be? Asked Azula as I entered her room in another guise. Forgive me, Princess Azula, Lady Ty Lee sent me with a message that she wanted to surprise you, hence she sent me the best masseuse she could find. She said you mentioned needing a massage. Azula turned towards me. She looked tired, with shadows of fatigue and lack of sleep under her eyes, and her eyes were tinged with redness. She scrutinized me with narrowed eyes for a few seconds, then nodded at me and went behind a screen to change. Of course, what I had said was a complete fabrication, but I had been observing Azula and Ty Lee for several days in the guise of a servant, and even at night, just hiding in the shadows of the palace. I watched to find out if it was even worth approaching her, and if so, how to do it. This conversation, in which Azula mentioned how much she missed the messages I gave her, was conducted in what she believed to be privacy with a friend, which is probably why she believed me. I'd bet on this. If it hadn't worked out, I had a couple more ideas on how to handle the situation without drawing attention. Soon, with a bowl containing oil, I approached Azula, who was lying on her stomach. Dipping my hands into the oil, I began to rub it into her back, neck, and shoulders, gradually increasing the sensitivity of her nerve endings. Soon, the princess lay completely relaxed, and I continued to massage her muscles. Now, using bending, I did it in such a way that she would receive complete relaxation, having practiced on her before, and then, for about 15 minutes after the end, she would not have the strength to get up. All her muscles would be soft and unresponsive. You weren't sent by Ty Lee, were you, Garo? Azula asked quietly, causing me to freeze for a moment, but I continued my task. Or should I better call you the blood monster? Garo isn't your real name, right? I recognized you almost immediately. Only you could give a massage like this. I silently continued pressing and kneading the muscles, not responding to her words. My father was furious when he received the message about the mercenaries' destruction. There are no direct pieces of evidence that you and the blood monster are the same person. But that was enough for my father. There are plenty of indirect clues. And the only known witness who knows you also claimed that you and the blood monster are the same person. So it all started with the first? Well, that's how it is with good deeds, they pay off, but not in the way you would like, I finally responded to Azula. Maybe you'll tell me about yourself? I'm completely at your mercy right now. Until you stop the massage, I can hardly even move. And after that as well. And I'm curious about who the person I first fell in love with really is. There's not much to tell. I was born in one of the Earth Kingdom villages, the name of which I still do not know. I had an older twin brother. A mother. We lived well. My brother and I awakened our waterbending abilities, and we began to learn on our own. Through trial and error. With imagination and perseverance. Years went by, and there were successes and failures. I grew, my brother grew. Then the Fire Nation soldiers came looking for waterbenders. My brother and I fled, but a lizard caught up to us, and although we managed to kill it, my brother died from blood loss. Then I returned to the village and learned that my mother had been burned by a firebender. Then I killed the attackers. Waterbending is very underestimated in guerrilla warfare. Even a small one like me then could kill everyone brutally, venting all the pain and rage from losing my loved ones. That's how my story began. First, I achieved excellent control over water and ice, then vapor, blood, and plants followed. By that time, I was already quite a notorious maniac. And then they caught you, she asked, turning her head towards me with effort and looking into my eyes. Into my own eyes. My own face. With great difficulty and casualties, burying them in bodies, so to speak, but yes, they caught me. That's how I lost my arm and ended up in a stone cell. With difficulty, but I adapted, survived, waited, learned. Is that when you did the impossible? She asked. Yes. But how? Waterbending couldn't give you anything there. Weaknesses can be overcome, disadvantages turned into advantages. I know that. I learned it on myself. Then, in the cell, my weakness was water. My disadvantage was that I was in that cell. But I turned the disadvantage into an advantage. I overcame my weakness. I did what was considered impossible, became the first bender to master both water and earthbending. And I escaped. Killed everyone but the first, took a long time to recover. Regrew my arm. Returning to my previous physical form and capabilities. Mastered new bending for myself. I moved from her back and neck with shoulders to her legs and began to rub the oil there. I told Azula about the events that happened to me, my motives. So, I'm just a means for you to get what you need? Azula asked quietly, almost inaudibly, turning her face away. That was the case. That's why I started all this, although initially, I went with you out of boredom and because I had already bonded with Ty Lee. She's infectiously joyful and positive. I didn't want to lose her. It was only later that it got to this whole situation. But at the Air Temple, I realized, when I was almost done with my training, when there was just one step left, that I had grown too attached to you, that I like you, that you were dear to me. What would I say if I traveled halfway across the world to give you a massage, and, to be honest, I now don't know what to do. I just can't make a choice. What choice is there? She asked me. You, or power. You, who became dear enough to me that I couldn't just ponder but have been unable to decide for a long time to choose power. Or power, which I've been striving for many years. Because of which I was able to overcome such things that would have surely killed anyone else. You, or the goal that made me who I am. Azula was silent while I continued to massage her, but then, with difficulty, she turned onto her back and, with visible effort, stretched out her arms, wrapping them around my neck and pulling me to her, kissed me. I reciprocated the kiss and also embraced her, not breaking such a pleasant kiss. Then I'll be maximally selfish, she said, breaking the kiss and looking into my eyes with a smile, and do everything to make you choose me. Chapter 56. will you stay with me? Azula asked, pressing her entire body against me. And how do you imagine that? Just ignore everything and walk out of your room together, pretending everything is any? I admit, that would be incredibly amusing. Only when the shock wears off followed by bewilderment, they'll try to capture me, and then the number of the living in the vicinity will noticeably decrease. Or are you suggesting I pretend to be a servant? They all know each other there, they've worked together for so long. Believe me, I know what I'm talking about. I've been looking for ways to get in here for a long time and study everything I could. So that's not an option either. Maybe it's better if you just leave with me? Just take off and leave. With my abilities, I can provide a fairly comfortable life almost anywhere. Not up to royal standards, but we won't live like vagrants either. That much I can promise you. I can't. Why? I've only recently caught my brother and uncle with your help, who are traitors, and now to run away with someone whom my father, the Fire Lord, has declared an outlaw. Does your father really dislike me that much? I asked. If I didn't love you, I would have tried to kill you right here. You've done so much terrible to the Fire Nation that children are now frightened by you, legends are built, you've become a real legend among the Fire Nation. A frightening, terrifying, very dark legend, but a legend nonetheless. My father is no exception and, despite everything, also wishes to destroy you. And how do you feel about me? I asked. I don't care about all that anymore. When I found out who you were, I couldn't believe it. But then, when you were there, when I realized it was you, I didn't care anymore about it. I see, well, good. At that moment, someone knocked on the door, and I, instantly reacting, rolled out of bed from under the blanket and rolled under the bed. Princess Azula, breakfast is about to start, said the servant peeking through the door. I won't be having breakfast. Now leave and let me sleep. And tell the others not to disturb me. The servant quickly slipped away, and I heard the door close. Come out, Frio. Was it cold under there? She asked, looking at me emerging naked from under the bed. It was much warmer with you, I said, beginning to dress. What will you do now? She asked me. As I've already said, I don't know. Just can't imagine. The only option that comes to mind is to keep developing. Sooner or later, I will become strong enough that your father wouldn't dare say anything to me. And if he dares, he'll regret it, as will everyone who supports him. I heard that we are about to be attacked. On the day of the solar eclipse. On that day, firebenders lose their power. Please, will you be with me that day? Again, how do you imagine that? On such a day, everyone will be especially vigilant. And when is it? There's just over 2 weeks left. I'll see what can be done, but it's unlikely I'll do anything. The best option I've suggested to you: leave with me. Just forget everything and go with me right now. And what then? When the Father conquers the entire Earth Kingdom? Only the last strongholds of resistance are left. And after the eclipse, they will have no chance. The comet, right? I asked, recalling the history books I had read in large numbers when I was still the head of the gang. I had a lot of time then. Yes. It will make firebenders many times stronger, and the resistance will have no chance. In that case, perhaps I'll just challenge your father to an Agni Kai. Then, after defeating him, with all matters settled, I'll challenge him to a duel. Frio, are you joking? The Fire Lord is the strongest firebender of all. Yes, you're stronger than me, but even so, he's still stronger. Maybe so, but in my case, he'll practically have to fight an avatar. Without the avatar state, but still. That's practically a fourfold advantage. And I didn't start fighting yesterday, Azula. And if it doesn't work out, she asked me, frowning. And if it doesn't work out, then in the next life, I'll know which power I need to aspire to. I'm not afraid of death, so I fearlessly take the lives of my enemies. I've seen the spirit world. Twice. It's dangerous, but not so bad. And me? If you die, how will I live on? She asked me after a long pause, as I was almost fully dressed. If I die, it means I made the wrong choice. Right now, I've chosen you. I've given up the last step towards gaining power. So, I'll have to gather strength in other ways. By other means. And if I lose, it means my choice was mistaken. That's what I know. As for what happens after, I have no idea. So, you're leaving everything up to me? Leaving me alone? Yes. Right now, I had the option to do the same thing, but you helped me choose you. You must understand what this means, that at some point I might not be strong enough. And so, you must be ready for the day I die. Finally and irreversibly. It's your choice too, not just mine. I fully dressed and approached Azula with a smile, leaned towards her, and kissed her. Probably sounds selfish, not romantic, or whatever. But that's me. I'm leaving now. I'll wait for the eclipse. Become stronger. Since you don't want to leave with me, you'll have to wait until I can, thanks to my power, ignore any displeasure from your father or even take his throne from him and place you on it. Now, goodbye, Azula. I turned around and headed for the door, behind which I felt no life, so I fearlessly opened it and left the palace. I sat on a hot stone islet 4 meters in radius, struggling to breathe, without stopping to sit straight and distance myself from the monstrous sensation of heat that enveloped me from all sides, involuntarily bringing with it unpleasant memories of my imprisonment under similar conditions in a stone cell. Around me, lava bubbled and rhythmically glowed, providing light and heat, and in the midst of this dangerous substance's small pool, there I sat. Judging by what I feel, there should be a sort of aura of distorted air, visible evidence of the heat emitted by my body, which I forcibly expel from my body to prevent overheating. I'd been sitting like this not for the first day, though it turned out to be far more difficult than I thought, doing the same as I had with the other elements, conquering. My energy, my chi, became so obedient after opening 6 of the 7 chakras that I literally feel the ongoing energy calibration inside me, now trying at my will to align with the energy of the surrounding earth state lava. There's little time left. Just 2 days, which I have left to achieve synchronization with lava. Not that anything depended on it, but all these 1.5 weeks or so I did nothing but strive for synchronization with a new element, so I just wanted to niche it and achieve it at least once before I head outside. Actually, I settled quite well on Phoenix Island, organizing a barely noticeable cave on one side of the island that leads here, to a large and fortified grotto with a huge pool of lava. Creating it was easy. The temperature of lava can reach up to 1,200 to 1,300 degrees Celsius, with the minimum average temperature around 500 degrees. With my new powers, it wasn't hard to create a huge pool of liquid rock, melting and liquefying a vast amount of earth and stone with fire. And in the middle of this hellish pool, I raised a stone column from the bottom, compacted by me to the maximum and whose temperature I periodically lowered by extracting heat from it. I maintained the temperature of the lava and didn't let it cool, evenly heating almost the entire mass at once. A new trick I learned here: even distribution of heat and warmth to an object. Conducted tests on lava successfully. Ventilation in the cave was manual. The air in the cave gradually became saturated with poisonous gases, after which I expelled all these masses of airbending from the cave, releasing it outside under pressure, immediately drawing in fresh air. I could have organized ventilation, but why bother? I wasn't going to be here that long. In any case, with the ability to materialize an air mix right in my lungs, this procedure was not necessary for me. However, 2 days passed and I still couldn't achieve control over the new element. Not surprising, really. Once, it took me many months to do this, but here, I felt I had achieved tremendous results in the shortest times, even if I didn't achieve everything I wanted. And now, a couple of hours later, I sit behind a boulder near the port on Phoenix Island, listening to the sensation of life. Now, after training with Puthik, if I concentrated, I could feel life further than the ships visible in the calm ocean. About 24 kilometers, no less. And that's more than enough to sense people approaching here. A large group of people, and among them, I sense familiar life currents. And one life current, approaching the volcano from the opposite side at a very high speed in a straight line. Hello again, Aang. With a smile on my face, I submerged into the earth and began to move quickly towards Azula. From what she told me, it's clear he will come to her. Chapter 57, They're close, I whispered into Azula's ear, then, after giving her a cheek kiss, I stepped away behind one of the metal columns. Meanwhile, the door to the grand hall, which was quite richly decorated, I must say, was blown off its hinges by a powerful gust of air, and they a couple of meters away from the entrance through which 3 girls rushed in. All of them, upon seeing Azula sitting on a richly decorated throne, froze in place, until the tattooed bald guy finally spoke. "Where is Fire Lord Ozai?" Azula lifted her head and, with sadness in her eyes looking at the intruders, started to play dumb and stall for time. "Isn't my presence enough for you? How sad, I was so looking forward to our reunion, but you are so cruel to me. You're weakened now, so tell us, where is Ozai?" yelled Suki, preparing for battle. "And I advise you to speak the truth, I will know if you try to lie," said Toph Beifong, now in battle gear, ready to use her earthbending at any moment. "Oh really? You know, I'm very good at lying. I'm 400 meters tall, I'm a pink unicorn, and I have pink wings, and my tail is made from a rainbow," Azula responded to Toph's words, and indeed, nothing in her gave away the lie. "Excellent self-control. Fine, maybe I can't tell your lie, but I still advise you to tell the truth." With those words, Toph sent an earthbending pulse towards Azula, however, nothing happened. "What? How?" She was surprised and tried again, but again nothing happened. "What, didn't work?" I asked, stepping out from behind the metal column. "You again? How come? Why can't I feel you?" yelled Toph. "Well, you see everything around thanks to vibrations, right? So I suppress my own vibrations, remaining invisible to your seismic sense. You should have long understood all the weaknesses of your abilities, Toph. And hello again, Aang. Hi Suki, glad to meet you again, although I'm very sorry it had to be under these circumstances." "What? We know each other?" The warrior was confused. It doesn't matter right now, but yes, we do. So, guys, and you, Aang, in particular, your invasion plan has failed, you realize that by now, right? It was known long before you started organizing it, simply because it was hardly the best chance for an attack. The other firebenders lose their bending and can't oppose you. "What do you mean, the others? Are you an exception?" asked Toph. "Me? Heh. You have no idea how right you are right now." I stopped suppressing my vibrations and now became visible to the blind girl, then began to change my appearance, returning to my original, true form. "Can't be. Frio," said Aang, as I finally took on my original appearance and stood before him with a smile on my face. "Surprise! What's the matter, Aang? Are you surprised? But by what exactly? By the fact that, despite your efforts to kill me, I still survived? Or perhaps by the fact that I've been hiding in such a manner all this time? Or maybe by the fact that I'm now on Azula's side? Or that it was me who killed Sokka? Yes, Suki, I killed him, don't think I just decided to tease you here. If so, I turned all attention to Aang, then you're about to be even more surprised." I shouted the last words and released a wave of white and blindingly bright flame at the avatar. The brightest fire covered the entire hall, from wall to wall, and when the flow subsided, one could see the slightly melted metal of the columns, the stone of the floor red from high temperature where the flame had passed, and a glowing red stone blade in the midst of all this. "But the solar eclipse," I heard Suki discussing with Aang behind the stone blade. "In my case, it's absolutely useless. Only with the eclipse did I understand the other firebenders from birth are used to absorbing and utilizing the ambient fire energy, which the sun supplies to the planet in large quantities. However, during a solar eclipse, the moon drastically changes the spectrum of energy owing to the planet. It's neither the spectrum of water nor fire. Something neutral. Ordinary firebenders are accustomed to using the surrounding force and mostly rely on it, but cut off the energy out from the sun, and their own personal strength and control over it are only enough for a weak burst, maybe a faint stream of fire from the strongest of firebenders. They haven't learned to use these forces. But here's the trouble. Guys, I wasn't born a firebender. I was born a waterbender. The moon nourished me from birth, and then I entirely rejected any external sources, even if I didn't realize it myself. And all my powers are solely mine. I yelled and sent a new stream of blinding fire into the blade. And I don't give a damn about any moon or ocean spirits, unlike the other waterbenders. And I don't give a damn about the solar eclipse. I am always fully battle-ready. I spoke and used everything I could. I spoke and told anything, even what I recently learned from Azula about an incident at the North Pole. And I only paused to. Chapter 58, indulging in a piece of iron in my hand, which molded like clay, I observed the landscapes on the horizon. Beneath us were seemingly endless waters, and land on the horizon. And all this under an incredible, stirring sense of boundless power and energy, infinite might and absolute invincibility. These were the feelings I began to experience as soon as the world around began to simply drown in the fiery energy spreading around from Sozin's commenting past. A huge fiery bolide with a massive fiery tail, cutting through the heavens and bringing with it as much energy as I had never felt in my life. Such strength. Such power. I was bursting with the desire to act, to move, to use all this power spread around me. Azula, in our last meeting, told me about her father's plans. No, she herself contributed to these plans, but the final decision was made by Ozai himself. And sneaking onto the main airship was a breeze for me. I only sneaked in here because of Azula, but at the last moment, Ozai left her and appointed her as the Fire Lord, removing these responsibilities from himself and becoming the Phoenix King. Yes, Azula's dad's ego knows no bounds. However, this made things even easier for me. Now that Azula has been appointed Fire Lord, all I need to do is wait for Ozai to achieve his goal and then casually take him down. There's no point in challenging an Agni Kai now. Azula will already be crowned. And then I'll disguise myself, change my appearance, and calmly be with her. On the horizon, the Earth Kingdom appears, with huge cliffs rising up from the ground like columns, massive boulders of stone. And above our heads, a huge comet began to pass by, giving its power to all firebenders. The airship reached the territory of the Earth, and Ozai extended his hand. My senses became much sharper, including my sense of bending. And now I felt how a tiny spark of fire absorbed a tremendous amount of firepower spread around. A moment of complete filling, dictated by the boundary of control over energy, and then a colossal stream of fire, hundreds of meters of flames flooded the land, turning all living things to ash. I get goosebumps all over my body from the sight of what's happening. Suddenly, the airship shook as if from blows, and then began to tilt. I looked around and saw a powerful stream rushing from one of the cliffs towards the airship, followed by an explosion that shook the entire machine, which began to fall. Ozai tore off his clothes and, using the comet's energy, began to use jet propulsion, heading towards the one who in my senses had such a familiar sense of life. I jumped down and began to fall to the ground, watching both the falling airship and observing its explosion. Just before hitting the ground, I extinguished the falling impulse and, approaching the cliff, climbed up through it. From there, I had an excellent view of the ongoing battle. I watched as Ozai used all the power given by the comet, while Aang tried to fight back, using all possibilities. The tossing of these two characters and the use of a huge amount of fire was amusing to watch, as Aang tried to use water and earth in attempts to withstand the power greatly enhanced by Ozai himself. More and more, Ozai gained the upper hand, gradually shifting from exchanging bending blows to simply and overwhelmingly beating the child when Aang went on the defensive. And in one moment, I felt everything suddenly changed. Is Ozai strong? Undoubtedly. He is very strong. Experienced? It cannot be otherwise. However, Roku was better than him in all this. They learned rebending from roughly the same program, the same system, and in all respects, Roku was better. And there are dozens of such past Avatar incarnations from the Fire Tribe. And now I felt how Aang gained the strength of the Avatar. Now he has merged with the powers of all the Avatars, all their strength and might, skills, and abilities. And now, I doubt Ozai has a chance, because his only advantage, the comet, extends to the Avatar as well. And then, the Avatar decided to use all his powers. A massive impulse of bending energy spread around, and it seemed the world paused for a moment. Then it erupted into action. Air masses began to move and swirl, condensing and compressing, wrapping into a cocoon around the Avatar, who looked at Ozai and, lifting his head upwards, soared, spreading his arms and legs, and roared. Streams of fire burst from his mouth, hands, and feet for tens of meters, bending and condensing into something akin to an accretion ring. Huge rocks and boulders were torn from the ground and by bending were compressed into tiny stones of enormous density, which then also began to rotate around the Avatar. A massive tsunami, raised by the will of the Avatar, condensed into a small ring. All these elements swirled and rotated around the Avatar, who now simply radiated his power outward. The Avatar's first strike was so devastating that it blew Ozai away with a stream of compressed air, and although he eventually managed to escape from this airstream, it demolished a cliff, and its boulders began crashing into subsequent cliffs at tremendous speed, almost destroying them too. Realizing things had gone very badly, Ozai made a run for it on jet propulsion, fleeing from the Avatar. But Aang didn't lag behind, constantly bombarding the strongest firebender with relentless attacks. This didn't last long, and at some point, the firebender's flame extinguished, falling into the water. Ozai, like a toy, was spun around and slammed into the cliffs with all. Again sent a stream of fire, although I felt that on the other side of the cover, the stone was being cooled by a stream of air from Aang, and they were retreating towards the exit. However, soon I felt that the space around me was again saturated with fire energy. I had accomplished my main task. You know what's the funniest thing, Aang? All this time, I was just dragging out the time and preventing you from leaving, and now the firebenders have regained their power, and your whole plan has gone down the drain. A wave of my hand and a stream of air cools the entire stone. Run, Aang, run and save yourself, because this is our last meeting when I allow you to stay alive. Try to save as many of your allies as possible. Not understanding anything and looking at me smiling, Aang, Toph, and Suki, who was still in shock looking at me, not believing it was really me, ran towards the exit, leaving only me and Azula in the room. Azula came up to me and hugged me from behind, resting her head on my shoulder. Why did you let them go? You could have killed them right here. The others, yes. But the Avatar could have survived a direct attack. And in his rage, he would probably enter the Avatar state. And we're inside a volcano, after all, and you are here too. Better let him go. I'm more than sure that I'll meet him again. Now tell me, Azula, haven't you changed your mind? Maybe, after all, you'll leave with me? Sorry, Frio, I would like to, but you understand, right? They will hunt us down later, if not now, then after my father's victory. He won't let this go. Yes, I understand, and that's exactly why I plan to overthrow him from the throne after his victory. Agni Kai is still allowed, right? You'll sit your beautiful self on it and we won't have such problems. We'll deal with the people somehow, or I'll disguise myself again. But now, I turned to Azula and kissed her, enjoying her lips, but eventually broke off the kiss. I have to go. Your servants are already coming here. Until we meet again, Azula. I took a few steps back and suddenly sank into the stone, immediately beginning to move beneath it. Now there are no particular tasks, so it's time to niche with lava and start with metal. Every new element in battle can become my advantage. Force. Even for a body strengthened by bending, this hit was powerful and terrifying. This is evident from Ozai's eyes, bulging out from pain shock, with his mouth wide open, gasping for air. Aang stopped nearby, almost above him, and directed all his power at Ozai. I thought I wouldn't have to deal with him, but Aang couldn't do it. He stopped the attack at the last second, leaving Ozai alive. Fool! All this time, I carefully followed these two and watched their entire fight, trying not to be seen, thankfully tracking them with my sensitivity to life, and their bending, which they generously used, was not difficult. And now, when Aang turned away, I saw Ozai start to move, but he was immediately paralyzed. He couldn't even twitch. You fool, Aang. You were, and you still are a fool. He wanted to attack you from behind, I said, landing next to them. Frio! The Avatar prepared for battle. Interestingly, he still hadn't exited the Avatar state, but he was already conscious, fully in control. Well done, you've learned some life lessons. And hello again, former Fire Lord Ozai. You might not recognize me, the current one, but don't worry, it doesn't matter. I said, and stone spikes, 1.5 meters long and 1.5 centimeters in diameter, suddenly pierced his body, killing him. Why did you kill him? Aang yelled. What? He wanted to kill me, he failed, and in return, I killed him. As you see, luck is on my side. And you're not one to be outraged, Aang, you have a far more important matter. Much more important. What? He asked, to which I couldn't help but smile sadistically. Do you remember what I told you when you were running away from me during the eclipse? I asked, and with a turn kicked a powerful wave of blindingly white flame at the Avatar. So! I wasn't joking, Aang. Chapter 59. A stream of fire knocks Aang off the cliff, barely having time to set up an air shield, but I too am propelled upwards as the neighboring cliffs crack and collide with the one I was on. Lightning bolts tear from my hands in an instant, quickly catching up to the Avatar, but at that moment, I see Aang familiarly redirecting the lightning, changing its course. Moments later, my own lightning is aimed back at me. I release a net woven from lightning from my hand, which disperses the redirected lightning back at me. However, following the lightning, a powerful air current rushes towards me. This time, I manage to dodge only partially and am spun at great speed, sending me skyward. With airbending, I correct my movement and stabilize my upward flight, then use jet propulsion flames to take control of the flight. I dive down, accelerating and feeling the G-forces from the high speed. A jerk to the left, and I dodge a dense stream of fire. A move to the side, and I evade another fireball, but the next second, I am unexpectedly enveloped by water. Arms spread, and the water instantly transforms into steam as I direct the expansion of gases away from myself. One of the bending rules we deduced with my brother during our self-taught waterbending lessons: the closer the element, the easier it is to control. And vice versa. If I can control a sphere of water close to me, as soon as I send it towards another waterbender far away, there's a high chance they'll simply take control over it. It then depends on the control and power of the bender. Precisely, on both. The Avatar is the strongest bender. Yet even so, I will not allow him to control water that is close to me. The steam turns into V-centimeter ice spikes, which immediately go towards Aang, but they couldn't penetrate the air current swirling around him. I begin to descend, dodging his attacks and sending back my own. I must admit, not without pride, that I fly much faster than Ozai. However, he could simply not survive such flights. The forces experienced are too great. I am still alive only thanks to control over blood and body. So catching up to me is not as easy for Aang as it is for Ozai. I starting in circles, rather, in a spiral, then dodge two of his air currents and land near one of the cliffs. Aang, do you know why I can do everything that others cannot? I began to stall, mostly focusing on entirely different processes. There's a phenomenon in the development of civilization where every question, no matter how simple it may seem to you now, is philosophical. People ponder over it, argue, propose hypotheses, and conduct experiments that confirm them, and so on. But all of them, however correct they may seem, are somehow incomplete or inaccurate. But over time, the amount of knowledge accumulates the necessary mass, and then precise and true explanations are found for these, seemingly philosophical, questions. That's the whole difference between me and everyone else. Including you. You all are damn philosophers, arguing and arguing, but unable to come to the full truth. And I am the one who, without even realizing it in childhood, took a step forward. I collected information, statistics, experimented, again and again, repeating the same actions, like a madman. But I moved away from philosophy and went from reactions and hypotheses to precise answers. That's the whole difference between me and you. What are you getting at? Aang said angrily, landing on the ground 10.5 meters from me. There was no glow. He controls himself. Had I not trained with Puthik myself, I might think he learned to open chakras from him. He's still in the avatar state, but externally there are no signs. It means that you need to know chemistry and physics, I said with a smirk, and at maximum speed plunged deep underground, then created a cavity around myself, which I fortified to the maximum and filled with air I created. Meanwhile, on the surface, in the air where Freya once stood, a bright orb consisting of darting sparks hung suspended. It was encased in a shell of densely compressed gas, which thinned with each passing second. Aang was swaying from side to side. Only now did he notice something happening to him. He couldn't gather himself or focus his vision, his ears rang increasingly louder with some indistinct pounding, his head spun, and he felt a rising nausea as his facial muscles began to contract involuntarily. Aang couldn't understand what was happening to him, realizing only that something very bad was about to happen. Realizing this, the Avatar formed a thick sphere of stone around himself. In the next second, the LM of dense gases finally melted away, as if tens, if not hundreds of meters around burst into the ash of a single explosion. A volumetric explosion is a very serious matter, causing immense damage. Feeling the shockwave and vibrations from the explosion, a few seconds later, I started to emerge, thinking that if Aang survived this, which cannot be denied, then he would suffer from oxygen poisoning, having breathed in too much oxygen while chasing me, and while I distracted him with talk. The most challenging part was not allowing Aang's fire, which circled around him and with which he periodically attacked, to ignite the oxygen, which I had been diverting away from the fire. Naturally, I also refrained from using anything explosive during the chase. And then, to notice the first signs of beginning oxygen poisoning and to leave behind a ball lightning in a protective gas shell. How is that even possible? But it doesn't matter. The more I use bending and the more I develop, the more I understand that although bending can be used in a scientific manner, it doesn't have to obey the laws of science known to me. And stable ball lightning is direct evidence of this. I emerged outside and found myself amid dust, which barely let through the reddish light pouring from the skies. Listening for a second, I began moving towards where I felt life. I was almost unsurprised that the Avatar had survived even now. I saw a stone sphere, from the cracks of which the brightest light was pouring. Oh, I don't like this at all. I thought, using all my abilities and concentrating in my left hand my own and the surrounding fire chi, which was in abundance. I learned this trick thanks to Iroh Star. It came to him intuitively, while I had to regrow my fingers many times before I could do it correctly. Although he paid with his hand and foot for the same thing, as far as I know. The fire chi concentrated in my hand but did not transform into fire, remaining just fire chi, and now I direct my hand and under immense pressure in the form of a drill, I release the chi into the sphere. It looks as if a thin beam splits the air with a barely audible whistle, but then this beam collides with something and then, boom. The explosion raised a cloud of dust, and I felt Aang being blown away further and crashing into one of those huge cliffs. Without slowing down, I launched lightning from my other hand. This time, another explosion sounded. There was no dodge, I felt it for sure, nor redirection of the lightning. The lightning hit something. Obedient to my wish, the dust settles, revealing an impressive scene. There stands a huge cliff, into which the Avatar had crashed, and around it, a vast amount of small rubble, hit by my lightning, flies at high speed. The whirl of rubble ceased and split into two huge, multi-ton heaps, gathered on either side of the Avatar. Not Aang, but the Avatar. Now he appeared as a 2-meter-plus beastly man and some cloak on his shoulders, with a thick black beard and similar hair. And his face was in anger, his eyes and mouth glowing, looking straight into my eyes. "Something new," I said, and immediately, at maximum speed, took off, overcoming immense forces. All to dodge an attack. At supersonic speed, with characteristic pops, thousands of small stones hurled towards me. The cliff I had just stood on was simply shattered, one could say, torn apart. The bombardment didn't stop, and I barely managed to dodge, already hit by several projectiles that pierced through my body, leaving 3 holes in my much-suffering right hand and one, particularly fortunate projectile, that tore off my index finger. The Avatar's projectiles were unlimited, and the rocks as cover didn't stand a chance. The stream of projectiles simply tore them apart in less than 2 seconds. I had a few moments to hide behind several rocks before the Avatar would change his ring position. He hadn't lost the ability to Y. An idea formed in my mind, and I immediately condensed water from the air, which I turned into a disc and spun, then formed a similar disc out of white flame right after the water, and not running away this time, I on jet propulsion towards the Avatar. The stream of supersonic projectiles hit the swiftly moving water and lost speed, their trajectory altered by the water's motion. Yet, even so, the momentum was enough for the projectiles to overcome the water disk, literally vaporizing in the plasma disk. I towards the Avatar, understanding that fighting him at long distances was absolutely useless. Fire and lightning were easily blocked by this rubble, and even explosions couldn't scatter them strongly enough, and breaches in the defense just couldn't form in time. The other elements were even less helpful in this situation. It was clear to anyone that this incarnation of the Avatar had achieved incredible results in controlling earth and stone. To say nothing of the fact that even I couldn't accelerate pebbles to supersonic speeds. Not to mention such natural control over such a mass of rubble. I could imitate it to some extent, but to reach this level was still far beyond me. I got as close as possible, almost right up close, and after icing my foot, I kicked him, transforming the ice into steam at the moment of impact and directing the expanding gases towards the Avatar. But instead, I hit empty air, and the steam dissipated into nothingness, as did the entire impact, and the next moment, my leg was grabbed by a woman's hand which, using my own inertia, spun me in the air and slammed me into the cliff on which she stood. I passed through the stone, making it malleable, and emerged on the opposite side, but next to me was already a woman with makeup similar to the Kyoshi warriors, fans in her hands, delivering the same kind of kick I had just attempted. The kick, enhanced with a directed steam explosion, sent me rocketing into the ground. I distinctly felt 3 ribs crack and a multitude of small blood vessels burst. Crashing into the ground, I bounced off it like a ball, then landed on my feet and slid to a stop. Before me, the Avatar Kyoshi descended to the ground. My clothes were shredded and beyond salvageable, so I simply tore off the obstructing remnants and was left in equally tattered pants. A huge bruise was already visible on my left side around the ribs. So now, I'm not fighting Aang, essentially a young boy, but a 200-plus-year-old warrior, a master of martial arts, proficient in all the elemental bending disciplines available to the Avatar, as proven at least by how easily she copied my steam strike, having immense experience, not only in combat. And, to be honest, if I look at it objectively, I'm in a complete mess. Faced with an overwhelmingly strong opponent, and I start to fear? Oh yes. I'm scared. My hands are slightly trembling, I feel an approaching tremor in my legs, and my blood is boiling with liters of adrenaline. However, I accept this fear. Didn't I learn this on the island with the old man Puthik for nothing? Kyoshi didn't wait for my move and charged at me at tremendous speed, delivering a strike accompanied by a gust of air that blew me away and left 2 furrows in the ground from my legs. Bare legs, since the footwear couldn't even withstand the start of the beating. Despite the pain in my arms, which I barely used to block the strike, I used the seconds gained to saturate my blood with oxygen. Generally, doing this, I'm poisoning myself with oxygen, primarily affecting nerve cells by disrupting their metabolism, but when using chi simultaneously, everything changes. Here, bending acts as a catalyst, smoothing out all the rough edges, allowing me to pull off what I just did. Eyelids dropped, sounds faded away, only a faint ringing and the sound of my pulse remained audible. I felt no pain or fatigue, no tension, only lightness. Opening my eyes and tilting my head to the left, I dodged Kyoshi's ST. With my right hand at maximum speed, I grabbed the forearm of the striking hand and with fingers bent at the second phalanx, I struck under the armpit. My right leg delivered a kick to the femur of the warrior's right leg. The kick wouldn't break the bone. Benders have very strong bones, but it would cause excruciating pain, while simultaneously pulling Kyoshi forward by the grabbed arm, causing her to fall without a stable point of support. A quick shift of my legs and I delivered a counterkick with my other knee to the falling warrior, a sharp blade of metal gleaming on my knee. However, just milliseconds before the blade penetrated the Avatar's body, when I could already feel the skin being pierced, the Avatar's body glowed, and I was repelled by a wave of air. I was only thrown back 2 or 3 meters, stopping myself in the air with a counter-gust of wind and jet flames from my legs and hands, immediately rushing back towards the Avatar, not giving him a chance to use any more of his tricks. There were only a pathetic 3 meters between us, but in the moments I edged towards the Avatar, I noticed the ground beneath me transforming into lava, and with just 2 meters to go, I saw, as if in slow motion, the lava beginning to rise. I won't make it, I thought, starting to swirl around me streams of air mixed with water, and using all my lava bending abilities to prevent it from engulfing me. The air had only begun to swirl, the lava had already risen 1/4 of a meter, and I swung my left leg, sending a metal blade towards the new Avatar, who appeared as a tall, adult man with a strange headdress, a narrow black beard, and similar mustaches. Then, my perception returned to normal, and I was engulfed by the lava. It worked. Not fully, but it worked. Forget about the multitude of burns and the agonizing pain. I certainly won't die from shock. The main thing is that I didn't die immediately. I tumbled out of the lava pillar at a height of 15 to 20 meters, quickly moving to the top of one of the cliffs. Despite the pain, now completely naked, the remnants of my clothes didn't survive the ordeal by lava. I lay on the cliff to catch my breath for a second, ideally a dozen. It would have been perfect to lie there for a minute. I listened to myself. Multiple injuries. More than half of my body's surface burned by lava, missing the index finger on my right hand. The left eye not functioning, seems to have burst, no hair left at all. The Avatar's unexpected transformation indeed broke 3 ribs that were only cracked before. My right arm had 3 wide open wounds, not to mention my burned genitals and scalded scrotum. Fingers on my feet and partially on my hands felt burnt, and it seemed my nose was also not in good shape. In short, despite how good I look from the outside and ignoring the incredible pain I have the pleasure of experiencing, I got off pretty easily. Half a year with plentiful nutrition or 2 years without food and water at all, and I'll be back to my handsome self. And if I absorb the life force of 6 people, I'll recover in just 2 months. May all the men in the world screw you in all your holes continuously throughout all your lives. I yelled as I felt an approaching life. There were noticeably fewer lives felt, by the way. Helping myself with water bending, I stood up. Maintaining balance was very difficult when almost no toes were left. Listening to myself, I realized I didn't have much strength left. But that's if I only use my own strength, as I usually do. There's an alternative, which everyone else uses. Especially since there's an abundance of flare chi around. Through terrible pain, I unleashed a wave of white flame, which only met Aang as he rose to my altitude. Yes, Aang. He responded with a gust of air, simply slicing my wave in the center. I had already released a 6th fireball at him, but all of them were stopped by dense air bursts that pierced through the fireballs, destroying them in the process. Notably, Aang did all this using only one hand, his right, because he didn't have his left. At the same time as the cut on his arm, there was also a clean cut on Aang's side. Quite deep. Both, it seems, he had already cauterized. Heh, so I did hit after all. Aang looked orders of magnitude better than me, although still not great. The pallor of his skin and the shadows under his eyes suggested he'd lost a good amount of blood. His stoop, despite being in the Avatar state, I released the strongest and densest stream of fire I could muster in my current state and with the remaining strength I had, but all the fire just clashed with the oncoming wind and was blown away while Aang walked towards me. 20 seconds of continuous flamethrower imitation, my last chi energies left me. The rock in front of me, along the path of the fire, turned red and glowed but immediately cooled as soon as the avatar stepped on it. Ha, ha, ha. I gasped, too weak even to move. Another second and I fell to my knees, as my legs could no longer support me. NGH. What's next? Aang? I asked, smiling with my face that was now all burns, at the avatar. Can you, finally, kill me? Aang stood before me and said nothing. Just looked into my eyes. No, he said, after about 20 seconds of silence. Even though you're a monster, a beast, the worst person I've ever seen, I won't kill you. I don't want to kill you. Because you're still a person. Do you realize, my condition is only temporary? A cell in a volcano could have held me before, but now there's no prison that can keep me. My powers will return to me, Aang, I said, ignoring the pain with every word I spoke, every sound my throat made, and then, at our next meeting in battle, I'll be even stronger. Even more dangerous. No. You won't. You will not become, Aang said, coming close to me and placing his hand on my forehead. Frio, you're a strong bender, but now I take away your bending. Once and for all. I felt Aang's chi out into me, encountering something inside me that resisted. I felt I could resist, but also knew that if I lost, I'd lose my bending, forever. No. No. You dare not. Better kill me. Kill me. Do not dare. Do not dare touch my bending. Hear me. Do not dare. I screamed, completely forgetting about the pain in my throat and all other discomforts. I resisted, and I must say, I was doing well. The main thing was not to give up. The main thing was to have an unbreakable will. And I was sure I would not give up. Not for anything. I would not let what little I had left from my mother and brother be taken from me. But at some point, I felt that all the incarnations of the Avatar joined the battle of wills. Their entire will. Their entire force crashed down on me. I held on. Held on as best as I could, but at some point, my strength was just not enough. No, give it back. Give it back. Give it back. I screamed with all my might, tears streaming from my right eye. I felt that I could no longer feel it. I couldn't feel the chi. Couldn't feel the elements. And then I couldn't hold on any longer and fell into darkness. Iron, a mercenary with an eye on his forehead. Chapter 60, a firebender, one of the guards of the capital's prison, opened the door to one of the cells, quickly entered, and, placing a tray of food on the floor next to the cage, hurriedly headed towards the exit. Right at the exit, he heard the rustling of the prisoner. This particular guard was very superstitious. And he loved to collect rumors. These two traits were closely linked. He became superstitious after a decree from the new Fire Lord brought a new prisoner to the cell he was assigned to. At first, he wasn't very interested in who it was. And it looked like a living corpse. The toes were burnt, hair singed off, skin covered in severe burns, missing a left eye, genitals burnt, and it barely moved. It seemed it didn't even breathe. Yet, despite such injuries, it was alive. However, when he got bored, he began to find out who was his prisoner. And after he got the information, the sheet with the data fell from his hands. The bloody monster, or, as his name, Frio. The most terrifying person almost every resident of the Fire Nation, from children to elders, could imagine. Some bragged they were not afraid of the bloody monster, but the fame of this maniac, incredibly cruel and unimaginably strong, so powerful he could even fight on par with the Avatar. Stories had already spread among the people about how the Avatar defeated Lord Ozai, the former Fire Lord, and then lost an arm and received many injuries in a fight with the bloody monster. What happened next? No one knew, but now, this very bloody monster was sitting in his cell. Since he learned who he was dealing with, the guard started praying to all the spirits he knew, praying that Frio would never escape from the cell. But then strange things started happening. 3 months after Frio was imprisoned, directives often came from the capital stating that all guards had to be in a certain place at a certain time and nowhere else. And this directive was signed by the Fire Lord herself. So, thinking about violating the order was out of the question. This continued for half a year, after which such cases became much rarer, barely once a month, but an order was given to provide this prisoner with a ration of food that even the prison warden could envy. Yet, this order was also signed by the Fire Lord, and no one dared to break it. Despite the huge size of the portions, enough to feed 3 people, 3 times a day, everything was eaten. Where did it all go? Everyone got used to the situation, including our guard. And today, for the first time in many months, the guard responsible for the cell heard and saw some movement from the prisoner. Despite the long time that had passed since his arrival, and despite the fact that everyone had gotten used to his presence, his mere negligent movements instilled fear in the guard. Yes, as everyone knew, he had been stripped of his bending, which made him so dangerous, almost on par with the Avatar, and now he had so many burns and injuries that a child could defeat him, but his fame spoke against this information. When he was captured at the cost of enormous sacrifices among the benders and soldiers, he was placed in such a prison where he also was helpless, but, as a result, everything alive in that place was killed by him during his escape. Only one survivor remained. And under mysterious circumstances, he, and the entire family of that sole survivor, died in one day in one house. This happened during the turmoil right after the day of Black Sunday. And now, it said, known here in the prison, that he is absolutely helpless without a drop of bending. "Do you fear me?" Frio asked the guard, still facing the wall, wrapped in rags from head to toe, his back turned to the exit. "And no," he replied, but his quivering voice betrayed his true feelings. "Why?" the bloody maniac asked indifferently, emotionlessly. "Why do you fear me? Now, I am incapable of anything. Bending. I can no longer control it. The Avatar did something to me, and now I'm just a mere human. Nothing more. Well, with some exceptions." Those words about exceptions seriously spooked the guard. "Hey, where are you?" the voice of the prison warden echoed down the corridor, and a few seconds later, he peeked into the cell, then smirked widely. "So, this bastard finally stirred? Stop being shy? Hey, have you finally woken up?" Frio didn't respond, didn't move, still staring at the wall in front of him. "Oh, spirits, and people were scared of you. Heh! My son was afraid to sleep because of you. His friend lost his father, killed by you. And he was scared you'd kill me too, but what do I see? You can't hurt me now, you can't even harm a regular person. Pathetic wretch." The prison warden turned and left the cell without explaining why he was looking for the guard assigned to this cell. "Do you think the same? That I'm a pathetic wretch? Though, in some ways, he's right. He should have just left, ignored the questions, but he spoke. Everyone reaches the end of their path. Your path has ended, Mr. Frio, you've reached your limit, facing the Avatar. Now, you are as you are." Saying nothing more, not to tempt fate, he exited and closed the cell door behind him. He didn't see what only one person in the whole world, who occasionally visited him, saw. Once, the man, more resembling a living and mutilated corpse, turned towards the food. 2 of his native blue eyes on a flawless face looked at the food from beneath the ragged hood, from which newly grown hair peeked out, then at the door the guard had exited through, and back at the food. The guard would never have opened his mouth if he knew the future. Perhaps he would have regretted his words, only to hear the response, "What did you say? Everything has an end? I've reached my limit?" Each of his following words grew louder than the previous, and the will, once shattered and broken into tiny pieces, shards, sawdust, dust, receiving just a small emotional nudge, began to gather into a whole, into a monolith stronger than ever before. Unbeknownst to him, this minor figure in history did something that would unimaginably change the world. He set off that small pebble that would trigger an entire avalanche. Yes, everything has an end. Everything has a breaking point. There's a ceiling beyond which growth is impossible. But at the end, a new path can be found, a breaking object can be fixed or reforged, and the ceiling can be broken. Weaknesses can be overcome, AWS turned into strengths. I have no bending? Oh, that doesn't mean I'm now a harmless creature. Just now, I will turn weakness into strength. And then I will find a way to reclaim mine. For 7 years, Aang lived with Katara, constantly moving around the world, resolving the aftermath of the war's end. Glancing at his left hand, or rather the prosthesis that replaced it, the Avatar sighed deeply. He had turned 20 years old and was finally able to rest fully. After the death of the Phoenix King and the victory over Freo, everything scattered. Azula became the new ruler of the Fire Nation, crowned on the day of Sozin's Comet. She quickly ended military actions, solidifying the positions conquered during the war and safeguarding the colonies without weakening the army. Freo, even now, Aang shuddered at the memory of the bender. As Katara had told him, he could sustain his life with his bending, but even when Aang took his bending away, not fully understanding the implications, he sentenced the mage to death. Against all odds, he lived. With numerous injuries, he continued to live. Soon after, emissaries from the Fire Nation demanded Freo's body, as he was a particularly dangerous criminal to be imprisoned by them. Aang had no objections, he saw no harm in it. And after that, he never heard of him again. There were many other problems that the Avatar needed to solve as peacefully as possible to prevent a new war. Gradually, month by month, everything worked out. Toph quickly made a prosthesis for Aang's left hand, as Katara acknowledged she couldn't restore it. 2 years later, Aang encountered Zuko and Iroh, who had escaped during the eclipse 7 years ago. They lived in one of the villages, and if not for Zuko's scar, Aang would never have recognized him. Was the Avatar surprised by this encounter? Undoubtedly. But observing them, he realized it was best not to interfere. They lived peacefully and hardly used their firebending. Aang was sitting on the porch of his house, watching the setting sun, when an old acquaintance, Suki, approached him. "Hello, I didn't expect to see you. What brings you here?" he asked. "Aang. I've just been told, the Fire Nation has been hiding it and still does, using all their might, even the civilians don't know, to avoid panic." "What happened?" Aang asked, standing up, concerned. "He escaped." Aang, Freo escaped from prison. "No bending?" Aang muttered under his breath, struggling to look at the walls and floor where Fire Nation mages and soldiers lay with severed limbs and smashed heads, and some walls bore huge cracks and dents, stone chipped away and metal bars of cages bent. "How did he do it?" the Avatar asked one of the firebenders, looking at a hole in the wall. "We don't know," he replied. Although he, like many other firebenders, had little love for the Avatar, Freo terrified him much more. And now, with no bending, considering what he did, it's even scarier. So in this matter, he was fully cooperating with the Avatar. Returning to the cell from which the Avatar's old acquaintance had escaped, Aang looked again at the hieroglyphs written in blood by a firebender lying nearby. "Hello, Aang. It seems we'll meet again soon." Aang's mood was not the best to begin with, and now it had plummeted so deep that few could retrieve it. The Fire Lady was in her room, looking out the window at the edges of the crater of a huge volcano. She had mixed feelings that she was trying to sort out. Suddenly, she felt she was not alone in her room. A bright blue fire dagger ignited in her hand, which she immediately used to attack behind her without looking. Servants and others would not approach her from behind. The fiery blade, capable of slicing through stone almost without resistance, harmlessly shattered and dispersed when it collided with a broad palm that immediately grasped her wrist, pulling her in. It all happened so quickly that Azula didn't understand what was happening until she was enveloped by huge arms hugging her. "For the last 4 years, you haven't visited me. Have you found someone else?" asked the voice, as she was pressed against the one who had embraced her. No. I thought your mind was already dead. But how? And what happened to you? You've become different. The Avatar stripped me of my bending, that's true. But I still have my body. And life. A lot of life. Over my practice, I absorbed so much life force from other people and benders that my own grew enough to keep me alive, even being barely a living piece of roasted meat. And even very slowly healed. Thank you for the food, my love. Without it, it would have been very difficult. But why have you become so large? She asked, distancing herself from Frio and examining him. If previously they were approximately the same height, plus or minus half a head, now he was a giant, his entire body seeming to consist of muscles, with a mane of thick black hair falling from his head, hiding somewhere in the rags that served as clothing for this giant, the only familiar thing being the blue eyes she often saw when visiting Frio in prison. A lot of free time, the inability to practice bending, abundant nutrition, and control over my body, combined with almost round-the-clock physical activities and finding what replaces bending for me, and in the future, I hope, supplements it. Bending replacement? Azula asked. Life. I have a lot of it. And when I fully recovered, I started learning to control it, the life energy. Years in the cage made me what you see now. And life force can largely replace bendingal power. The same body control was easy to relearn, shifting to life. Not what you expect when talking about a criminal who hasn't left a small cell for 7 years. Yes, that place became like home to me, as much as I might miss it. 7 years, you say? I thought only 4, at most VE had passed. I lost track of time again. And you, in this time, have blossomed, become even more beautiful than you were. Bending his head, Frio kissed the Fire Lady. I think, Azula said, pulling away from the kiss, we should close the door. So, this is how you live now? A voice sounded behind Aang. Aang immediately turned around, got up from the floor, and looked at the unexpected guest. It was a very tall man, over 2 meters tall, with black hair that fell in a thick mane to his shoulder blades. His skin had a dark hue, his shoulders were as wide as 2.5 Aangs, and his neck was thicker than the Avatar's leg. Something about him seemed familiar, but he could not pinpoint what exactly. Such a man, Aang would have definitely remembered. Who are you? He asked calmly. Oh, how sweet, you don't recognize me. Well, yes, I've put on quite a bit of weight over the years. The giant approached closer, looking down at Aang, and after a couple of seconds, he smiled, revealing all his teeth. The next second, Aang's body was breaking through a wooden wall, Aang outside. Stopping himself, the Avatar jumped to his feet, only to immediately receive another blow to the shoulder, which sent him Aang several more meters. You know, Aang, maybe I wouldn't have come to you, tried to achieve everything on my own. I even made significant progress trying to find a way to reclaim what you took from me, but, unfortunately, I came to some rather disheartening conclusions. On one hand, I'm glad my bending was always with me and no one stole it. On the other hand, I was blocked from using it in any way. Using life energy allowed me not to trigger the soul's immune response to the clamps that blocked the flow of bending in me, making the effect last until the end of my days. And even control over life force didn't yield results. These clamps are fixed by bending and can only be removed by a mixture of bending and life. Unfortunately, the only one besides me who has life energy, or rather can control it, is you. The one who put these clamps on. Frio! Aang looked at him, eyes widening. His eyes immediately started glowing, but in the next instant, the giant was next to him, grabbing his leg, and slamming the Avatar into the ground. Got it, got it. Now, show me what you've achieved. Aang flew out from the crash site already in the Avatar state, wrapped in a sphere of air. A dense air burst hit the giant's chest, but he just smiled even wider, not moving an inch. Didn't feel a thing. Now. The air around Frio thickened and turned red, his hair began to move, eyes filled with redness, and then he disappeared, to immediately appear beside Aang and with a backhand blow send him on a new flight, effortlessly bypassing the air sphere. Since it turns out that you're the only one who can return my bending at the moment, and you clearly won't do that, I had to find an alternative. And as you can see, this alternative didn't make me weaker, a fire wave EW at Frio, but he just met it with his hand and, the wave shattered as if it hit a rock, yet following it were stone blocks that were easily shattered by the giant's hands and feet, who didn't stop talking in the process. And years later, I figured out how to reclaim my bending on my own. It was all so simple. All it takes is just to die. With the last word, he moved behind Aang, grabbed him by the prosthesis, and with the other hand slammed his head into the ground. A little effort, and the prosthesis was torn off from the arm. Enough to perish, and those chains made of someone else's life force, constricting the flows of Chia, simply disappear. Unfortunately, one must die completely. So that nothing of the body remains. So that there's nothing for these clamps to grasp onto. And that means the end. The end of this life. A fire stream bursts from the stump of an arm and strikes right into Frio's chest. However, a reddish glow around his body repelled the fire, so that after a dozen seconds of being scorched, even the clothes on the giant's body remained unharmed. And so I thought, if I indeed perish, and I must do it, as I want to reclaim my bending, then I'll make sure you go with me. Not you, as Aang. But you, as the Avatar. What happened next was akin to an explosion. One of the Avatar's incarnations took control and managed to push Frio back, along with tearing a huge chunk of earth that seemed to cling to his feet, yet in flight, detached and fell to the ground. The incarnation changed, and before Frio stood the earthbending master familiar to him from the battle 7 years ago. Expectedly, he began the same barrage, thinking that an opponent without bending could not oppose him. However, Frio moved with such speed that the Avatar simply couldn't aim his fire. Circling around the Avatar, Frio instantly closed the distance to Aang and grabbed him by the neck. At the same moment, all the stones began to strike the giant but couldn't penetrate deeply enough, only leaving small holes in the skin where they hit. "Farewell forever," whispered Frio and, grabbing the head with his other hand, with difficulty, but tore the head from the body. The bending calmed, stones fell to the ground, the glow faded, and only blood, still driven by the heart, spurted out of the neck under pressure. This turned out to be even easier than I thought. Indeed, a different approach solves problems. Sure, had we fought with bending, I might have had a significant chance to lose again, though with a better chance to win. But now, all of Aang's and the Avatar's attacks are based on the possibility of victory and inflicting damage comparable to their durability. However, the development of the physical body, along with practices for controlling life force and managing the organism, made me an opponent not of their level in terms of durability. In my current state, even rearms are not a threat to me, let alone such attacks as this gravel barrage. And yet, this was the most fearsome of the Avatar's attacks I've seen, thought Frio, looking at the corpse, which was beginning to form a pool of blood. Turning his head towards Aang's home, Frio just sighed and trudged back from where he came. He had nothing more to do here, and Katara with the children can live on peacefully, even without the father of her children. Recommendation: the journey back took 2 months. All this time, Frio pondered over what step he was to take next. He had been free for 6 months and all this time had been seeking a way, but found only one. Having sneaked into the palace, I watched Azula from the shadows. Alongside her were 3 children, 2 girls and 1 boy. All of them had bright blue eyes, a clear indication to their father that they were indeed his children. During Frio's initial years in captivity, Azula hoped he would recover from the depression caused by the loss of his bending. He did recover, though he never lost the desire to regain control over it. As a result of this hope and her frequent visits to his cell, 3 children were born. Whose? The palace was rife with rumors, some of which involved him. Yet, no one dared to speak out. Those who began to speak have been missing for almost half a year, unable to be found. This served as a deterrent, but Azula had also become much stronger over the years. Hours later, the children went to their rooms, and Azula headed to her quarters. When she entered, I greeted her with a kiss, having arrived in the apartment before its mistress. Several hours later, I lay in bed with Azula, enjoying her company for the last time. "You're insane. This is simply suicide. For you and everyone else, yes. But not for me. For me, the journey doesn't end. I can feel it. Even without your bending, you're strong. The strongest. You defeated the Avatar alone and fought him on equal grounds before that. And how am I supposed to live after? Alone? Why? You have our children. Teach them as I instructed, and they can become just as strong. Make them powerful. Give them love and a path to strength." Azula said nothing and silently relaxed on top of me. I was too relaxed and fell asleep. A night later, Azula couldn't find Frio. He was nowhere to be found. He had simply vanished. No traces. No last words. Nothing. As if he had never existed. And 2 days later, a lone soul, having lost its body completely, entered the spirit world, which, however, couldn't contain the soul for too long. The soul was strong, and it yearned to live. To begin life anew. And it wasn't difficult to leave, especially after the recent death of one of the strongest spirits. The spirit world was in turmoil, and the soul easily left it. The end of the first book. I will take a break from this book for a while and will release another book. Frio's story is not over. That's the end of book 1 of this story. The author is currently on hiatus, so it'll be a while before the next upload, but until then, enjoy the following series. Peace.